Добро утро. Виждам, че вратите са затворени, така.
Good morning. I think we can all say hello for being here together. Thank you very much for your time. I hope that we'll be able to finish by noon, but there will be many interesting and useful discussions and presentations. We'll be listening to some presentations in the first part of the conference, and discussions will follow after the coffee break. In fact, immediately after the coffee break, I'd like to invite you to stay because we'll see and we'll observe and discuss a very interesting work, the result of the efforts of experts in journalism, a product that has been in the making for years, and finally it is ready and you'll be able to see it today. So the discussion will be very interesting. We have invited key people at key media in Bulgaria, top journalists, and together we'll cover very interesting topics. I think that these topics will be interesting for journalists, but also for us as parents. You know that as journalists, words are our main weapon, the main weapon of the fourth power. You know very well that words can do good, but also can bring harm, especially when we speak about covering children. And now, officially welcome to the International Conference Children and Media Mission Ethical Coverage, organized by UNICEF and the Association of European Journalists with the support of Happy Restaurants. And now I'm going to invite Maria Jesus Conde, the representative of UNICEF, to Bulgaria.
Здравейте. Good morning, everybody. Dear representative of the state institutions, media, academia, partners, Association of European Journalists, dear guests. It is a pleasure for me as a representative in Bulgaria of the UN organization with the mandate to protect children's rights everywhere, in all the circumstances, to be here in front of you and to be able to, in representation of UNICEF, to have the capacity to convoke committed journalists and public relation professionals to do something better for children in Bulgaria. So we are here for a common cause, to report ethically on children's rights and to promote children's rights in media. Nowadays, children have come to rely more and more upon media communication. And today, even the poorest and more remote communities can be reached by traditional media. And we all know the potential of media to inform, to educate, to nurture, entertain, to TV, radio, films, internet, and so on. But mass media, I have to say, that not only supplies actual information, which in the era of the fake news is more important than ever, but it promotes values, builds public opinion, persuades, raises awareness, and educates. UNICEF knows very well the power of media, and no matter this is the first time that we organize this meeting here in Bulgaria, UNICEF have been working for more than 40 years with the most important media companies everywhere. And we work with the most important TV, radio, newspapers in Europe, in America, in Africa, in Asia, not only to report ethically on children's rights, but to raise awareness about the most important problems that affect children in each society. And we have, I mean, in the framework of this partnership, we have been able to develop even some spaces in the different media modalities that are dedicated to children. I'm not talking about cartoons, I'm not talking about child programs, but especially to the concerns of children in each country. And for that reason, because the long story that we have working with media, we, with the support of journalists, have developed 6 principles that we always respect in our relations. And one, of course, the most important, because we are a UN organization working on children's rights, is to respect the dignity and the rights of every child when we talk about children, when we act on behalf of children. The second is in interviewing and reporting children, we have to pay special attention to the privacy and the confidentiality of the child. We have to hear their opinion every time that is possible to make them participate in the decisions that may affect them and to protect them from harm and retribution. No matter what a child says, openly and freely, we as adults, as professionals, have to be aware of the consequences of these statements, and we have to assess if this is something, no matter how interesting and how sensationalist can be, if this can hurt the child or not. We have, for that, to protect the interest, the best interest of a child every time that we talk about children or we act on behalf of children, and even when we do some advocacy for children. And to determine the best interest of the child, because you know that the best interest of the child is not what I consider is the best for a child. We have to analyze what are the social, political, I would say community-based consequences for a child, and every time, if it's possible, we have to hear their voices, to hear their opinion about the topic that we are dealing with. And we have also to be closest to those people who have some knowledge about the child, have a relation with the child, to know about the implications of this report or the statement of a child in the reportage or in the life. And of course, the last one is that we cannot publish any image of any story of a child that can put in risk the child or the siblings, even when the identities are changed, obscure, or not used. And it's very funny because I'm not a journalist, but every time that I see a child with this black band in the face, I said, okay, I cannot recognize the child because I don't know him. But so for me, it's the same if he has the band or not. But the neighbors, the peers, people around, they know, they recognize no matter this thing. So, I mean, there are these funny things that we have to be aware, that how we protect, how can we bring the voices of children without exposing them. This is something that we have to keep in mind every time we make a report. I am delighted also to announce that today we will be able to present the first ever guidebook on ethical reporting in Bulgarian that has been created by UNICEF, the Association of European Journalists, and distinguished journalists, PRs, experts, psychologists, lawyers, and others. And they have shared their experiences and practical tips. They have made some recommendations, and they informed us about the Bulgarian legislation, recommendation based on the Convention on the Rights of the Child, how to assess the best interest of the child from the psychological perspective, the language that we have to use when we talk about children and when we talk to children, and the questions that you as journalists and PR has to ask yourself during, after, and before telling children's stories. I encourage you, of course, to use this guidebook. and also to contribute with your own experience to it. We are here with the same purpose, to create child rights quality journalism, because child rights quality journalism and human rights quality journalism are essential for democratic justice and prosperous society in world we want to live in. Finally, I'm going to finalize saying that you can count on UNICEF, to continue going in deep in ethical reporting, as I'm sure that we are going to count on your commitment. There are many things that we have to do together in Bulgaria in relation to children's rights. And I'm going to leave the country in the 31st of May, so I want to share with you this news. And it would be my dream to have, before I leave, a kind of commitment with you, to be sure that we are going to work together to reform the Juvenile Justice Act. You, many organizations in Bulgaria, have been working together very hard for more than 8 years to change this legislation. Bulgaria is the only country in the European Union where a child can be deprived of freedom without committing a crime. We cannot accept this anymore. It's the only European Union country where the legislation has not been passed yet. Still is in force a legislation from 1958, the Antisocial Behavior Act. This is unacceptable. I have been in correctional boarding schools where children with mental health problems, children who haven't committed any offense, children who have been neglected since they were born, have been deprived of freedom. And you know the cost that this has for the child and for the society. Because these funds, these expenditures in these centers don't get any benefit to the child and to the society. And these children are going, these centers are the university of a crime, and they are going to learn how to do wrong things in their life. So I think that this is an important issue, an important outcome that we could bring together from this meeting. In addition to the learnings that we are going to achieve, be joined working on this. And we, UNICEF, as the organization, the UN organization with the mandate on children's rights, have a lot of information, have all the technical. We are supporting the government on the drafting of the Diversion Act. And so count on us in terms of technical knowledge, because we need to count on you on communication and changing social patterns. Thank you very much.
Вече чухте някои от основните въпроси и теми.
You already heard some of the main topics that we're going to discuss. They were already highlighted from this rostrum. The organizers of this event are the two organizations which are most logically in this role. These are UNICEF and the Association of European Journalists. So quite logically, I'd like to invite on stage Irina Nedeva, chairwoman of the board of the Association of European Journalists. Irina, you have the floor. Thank you very much. I'm very happy that we're all of us gathered here in this room. I have to say that it is a great honor for the Association of European Journalists to collaborate with Children's Fund, the UNICEF, in this first of its kind guidebook to reporting on children and their problems in the media. Let me say that the Association of European Journalists in Bulgaria is part of the larger Association of European Journalists established in the mid-1960s in Brussels. Ever since correspondents of the large European print media, electronic media, such as Financial Times and BBC and many others, and Their European correspondents in Brussels were united by the idea and the mission to respect the values on which the European Union was built in the first place. And as you know, it also includes the EU Convention on the Protection of Human Rights, the rights of children. In Bulgaria, we have a rather good legal foundation, good legal regulations. You know very well how these acts were adopted and drafted in the 1990s. But of course, there are also others which have not been changed and amended accordingly so as to meet the real standards and principles of the protection of the rights of children, especially when it comes to juvenile justice. We already heard UNICEF's position on this. So, in addition to the mission of journalists to report on the issues with which children are faced, we also have the responsibility of giving the floor to children, letting them speak in the media, not just show them when they're victims, when they're vulnerable, and probably even further victimizing them, making them even more vulnerable. Instead, we have to respect the dignity of the other person, of the human being who is the child. And as we heard, the child may well not know how to protect itself, even if we're well-meaning. What we want to see happening in the Bulgarian media, but not only. We don't want to see any more sensationalism, the pressure on media to be on top, to be the first reporting, to show from close-ups of the victims. Often enough, these are children. Whenever there is a big disaster, natural or other, usually the most vulnerable ones are the youngest. You know how very influential can be a suffering child's face in close-up. And we know that it doesn't take us anywhere. It is rather abuse of the power of the media, abuse of the children who become an object, helping you to tell your sensational story or make headlines or have a very impacting picture of a child in a vulnerable state, or just breaking the private space of a teenager, which can eventually bring to consequences that will be there for a lifetime. And so we really have to understand why so many people these days keep saying, forget about the media. They are vultures. They tend to break each and every rule for sensationalism. And we have to understand why there is so very little trust in the media, and it's further declining as a result of the media pursuing top ratings, high ratings at any cost. I'm very glad that we had the opportunity today to present jointly with UNICEF this guidebook, a guidebook that can help us build professional, interesting, intriguing journalism for all our audiences without, however, overstepping the limits of human dignity, because we're talking about people, and children are the most vulnerable part of our society. And we owe them respect. We owe them respect to all the rules there are. However, this guidebook is different, promotes different principles than those that are being drafted by different institutions. If you compare its text to a text coming from the supervisory authorities, from the regulators, you will not see so many prohibitions. Rather, you will see answers to the question how, to the different hows. How can we respect the dignity of a child and at the same time present important information? How to respect the rules of an institution dealing with children without blocking information or the information channel, especially when it comes to improper conduct or practices existing in one place or another. This is a very fine red line. It is very important for professional journalism. And in this guidebook, all of you can see both the good examples and the bad examples, what not to do and what to do. The key message is that there is a way to tell and show how children live, what their problems are, without being disrespectful of their rights. And we believe that this mission is possible. This wonderful guidebook will be presented in a while. So let me stop here. And once again, thank you, UNICEF, for being our partner. Thank you, all of us, for being with us today. Thank you very much, Irina, for such inspirational words. Actually, this was very much the spirit of our working meetings. I had the huge honor and privilege. I know that it's a cliche, but that's the fact. These are the exact words. I had the privilege of working with a team of extraordinary professionals on the writing of the guidebook, and I really like this word guidebook because it is a real guide. We try to ask the right questions, try to do this openly, try to answer them or challenge the answers that we were giving. We were trying also to find the right words because words are important, they matter. And I think that the outcome is a very good one, a very useful one. And through you, it can reach those who are going to use this as their actual guide in ethically reporting on children. We ask ourselves the logical questions. How are children present in our lives through the media when we have to report on their achievement, on good examples, and of course the most serious topics when we have to report on children, the most dramatic ones. We try to look into our own experience as journalists or as audiences of TV programs and other other information channels. We try to look at the good examples. Many of them we have included in the guidebook. I'm very happy that some of the people whom we have quoted as the sources of these great examples will be here today. These are some of our speakers today, so it is my pleasure to invite now Ms. Connie Fossey, who is with us. She traveled especially from Miami to be our guest. She is semi-nominee. She has worked for Telemundo, Univision, Terror Network. She is currently producing the Naked Truth series. Fossey will tell us about her documentary Children in Prison and the change which this documentary brought in juvenile justice in her country. Thank you very much for being with us, and you have the floor.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Connie Fossey. I'm an investigative producer and a documentary maker. First, I would like to thank UNICEF and the Association of European Journalists for this invitation and for making this conference possible. It's an honor to be here in your beautiful country of Bulgaria. The US incarcerates children at a higher rate than any other developed country in the world. In 2015 alone, nearly 1 million kids were arrested in America, most of them for nonviolent offenses. That year, my team has spent 10 months traveling across the country and talking to some of those children. We visited communities where schools were falling apart while juvenile detention centers were built and renovated. We found that the system that is supposed to help our most vulnerable children, mentally ill, the poor, minorities, often harms them. Without further ado, I want to introduce my documentary, Prison Kids. You can play it.
Come on, get up. I worry a lot that he'll end up in jail. It's so easy to end up in jail here, and for whatever reason. Come on, baby. I wanna go to school. Come on.
Aisha's son Zion is 7 years old.
Open. If he gets into an altercation or he does something that they think is punishable, definitely. I worry a lot. Zion, are you gonna behave today?
Yeah.
You gonna do all your work?
Okay.
You promise me?
Yeah.
Please, you have to learn.
Zion lives in Broward County, Florida. School has never been easy for him.
A referral is when you get written up and it goes in your permanent record. I think right now Zion has over 40 definitely. In 1 year he had over 25. And I think that was in first grade. He kept getting suspended. One day here, one day there. I had to leave my work 2-3 times a week.
Zion struggles with ADHD and anxiety, which makes it hard for him to sit through a full school day.
What would happen when you got in trouble?
It'll be bad, and it'll be hard to calm me down.
How did that make you feel?
Frustrated and bad.
Yeah. So I'm looking at his file right now. There's so many. I mean, I'm going through this and I just don't even know where to start because there's just so many. Behavioral concerns may result in exclusion from participation in activities. Unruly play. This one was the big one. Battery on a district employee. He just had a major anxiety attack. He threw his desk. He threw everything he can find, books, whatever. He was uncontrollable. He was crying and crying. The teacher went to try to hold him down, and she got kicked. They called me. They said, the police is here. You need to come right away. Again. The police officer said, look, I don't know if the teacher wants to press charges. I mean, she could because she's on her right to press charges. I felt like, okay, what are they gonna do? Is he gonna go to jail? Is he's gonna, go to juvenile? They're gonna handcuff him. I mean, he's 7, he's a baby, he's my baby.
At 7 years old, Zion could legally be arrested for battery in Florida. It's one of 33 states where there is no minimum age to charge a child with a crime. The US incarcerates more children than any other developed country, 54,000 on any given night. Americans pay about $8 billion a year to incarcerate kids, but that's only part of the cost.
You can do what we've asked you to, or you can suffer the consequences.
In the last year, we've seen small glimpses of what some call the criminalization of childhood, the handcuffing of a third grader in a Kentucky classroom, the suicide of Khalif Browder, who was featured in The New Yorker. At 16, he was sent to jail for 3 years without ever being convicted of a crime. The violent confrontation between police and teenagers at a neighborhood pool party in Texas. To many Americans, it's shocking, but it's a system we created, and it's destroying lives.
We can create a problem that did not exist, and then we turn them loose. We've, in essence, created a criminal.
The vast majority of kids in juvenile jail don't commit a violent crime. In fact, many are locked up for things that aren't even crimes for adults. Skipping school, running away from home, or missing curfew. Even those accused of more serious crimes are still children.
I could never imagine my life if I haven't been incarcerated as a kid.
Savannah first went to juvenile prison in Ohio when she was 14.
Yeah, I was young. I was young in there. And I really grew up in there.
This is her in 2009.
I definitely feel sad about missing out on like school, games, stuff like that. You know, being able to create memories for like my family. Like my mom tells me sometimes like I robbed her the chance of raising me.
Ohio's juvenile prisons, run by the state's Department of Youth Services, were some of the bleakest places to be a kid locked up in America.
I saw like a lot of girls cut in and trying to commit suicide, and very, very depressed girls and stuff like that in there. That was something I had never, experienced before.
Savannah's experience can be traced to what was happening in the country when she was just an infant.
In California, 3 children, all under the age of 10, were arrested this week after the near-fatal beating of an infant.
In Chicago, a 10 and 11-year-old drop a 5-year-old from a high-rise to his death. Another 14-year-old arrested for gang rape.
In the mid-90s, America became terrified of a new brand of child criminal.
Super predators come in every race, creed, and zip code. They have literally no concept of the future, either their own or anyone else's.
Today, they're just children, but will they be predators tomorrow?
The country went into a panic, and lawmakers responded with what seemed like a simple solution: lock them up.
There are no violent offenses that are juvenile. You rape somebody, you're an adult. You shoot somebody, you're an adult.
I'm directing the FBI and other investigative agencies to target gangs that involve juveniles in violent crime, and to seek authority to prosecute as adults teenagers who maim and kill like adults.
The number of kids locked up in America peaked in the year 2000, hitting 109,000 kids.
We can expect a crime wave of juvenile violence over the next 10 years.
But the predictions were wrong. There were no super predators. In fact, juvenile violent crime rates dropped, and the number of kids in juvenile facilities went down too. Still, the U.S. incarcerates children at a higher rate than anyone else. Those kids are usually black or brown. Most struggle with mental illness.
It tickles anyways.
This weighs on Zion's mom, Aisha.
That fear is still in me, that he'll, be arrested, that he won't finish school.
Hey, look at this. Nothing.
When you're a mom, you're so ambitious towards your kid. You want them to be better than you were. That's all I ask. But I'm scared.
We can stop there. So Prison Kids has been screened in the United States Capitol and dozens of community centers, churches, libraries across the country. We also have received a number of nominations and awards, including an Emmy. Fusion also launched a campaign that called to a ban on solitary confinement for minors. More than 65,000 people signed the petition. And after 3 months of the film release, President Obama announced that he will ban the use of solitary confinement for minors in federal prisons. So it's fair to say that we had some success. But we understood that this was a difficult story to produce. We were dealing with a population at risk. Most of our characters in our story suffer from trauma and violence themselves. So we have to make some tough decisions along the way editorially. I would like to talk to you about 5 things that we decide to do. The first one will be protecting juveniles' identities. We follow a standard practice, pretty much blur the faces of all the children that we didn't interview, and also got written parental consent or guardian consent for those that we interview. We also only use first names and change the names of those children who were dealing with a criminal conviction. Why? Why we did that? First of all, we didn't want it to jeopardize their cases. But second, we didn't want to create a footprint for these children. Just imagine Googling your name and the first thing that comes out is a crime that you committed when you were 14. It's definitely something that we didn't want it to create for these children. The third point is that we didn't reveal the crimes that they committed. And the reason behind it is that juvenile records in America are sealed by law. So nobody really have access to them. That doesn't mean that you don't do your reporting and try to get as much information as you can about these children. But we decided to keep the records private because they are indeed private. The second point that I want to talk about is focusing on why, not what. We all know in this room that children are different. That's why we don't allow children to drink or to vote or to join the military. Yet sometimes society decides which kids get to be kids. And that includes us, members of the media. A crime doesn't turn a child into an adult. It's as simple as that. So thinking about that, we try to portray our characters for who they are and not for what they did. And we took some steps in order to do that. So we visited their communities and spent time with their family members and their friends. We also were very transparent about the challenges that they face, whether it's poverty or mental illness or a broken home. One scene that you didn't get to see, we follow a young man as he's trying to find shelter. We show how difficult it is for him to even find a place to sleep. That takes me to my third point, fighting indifference. We all know that juvenile justice is not a voting issue. It's hard to engage our audience. In other words, it's hard to make people care. So how do we do to fight indifference? Fighting indifference, we decided to show the audience what's at stake for them. So the first example will be safety. Statistics show that children who enter the juvenile justice system are more likely to commit crimes in the future. So it's not making your communities safer by putting these kids in juvenile detention centers. They eventually are going to commit crimes, and that's going to impact the safety of your community. The second point is we talked about cost. It costs about $8 billion to incarcerate children in America. And that money is coming from you, taxpayer money. So even if you don't care about your safety, that's hitting your pockets too. So it's ineffective and it's also costly. Those are 2 things that we reported in our story, and I think that allowed to engage the audience. The fourth point that I want to talk about is providing alternatives. It's important for us not only to talk about the problem. The juvenile justice system has a lot of problems, but it's important for us to talk about solutions. So one of the things that we did in our story is that we embedded with community diversion programs that actually help kids who are dealing with some issues and help them to avoid incarceration. And those programs have better rates than incarceration in America. Another thing that we did is that we visited a juvenile detention center that actually focuses on rehabilitation and not punishment. And we also saw better results there too. So it's important to, in many ways, provide solutions for the audience because it shows that this is not an issue impossible to fix. There are actually people in America who are doing a good job at addressing this issue, and that's a better alternative that's also cheaper. And lastly, I think choosing your words wisely. When I see that picture, I see a solitary confinement cell. But authorities in Ohio, which is one of the places that we feature in our story, call this place the Special Management Units or Progress Units. Just to give you some background, kids spend there 23 hours locked up for days, months, even a year, as one of our characters. And most of those children were the most vulnerable ones. They were minorities, and also they were mentally ill. And the ones who were mentally ill were heavily medicated. I can call this a progress unit, but we know that the children who are locked there are not going to make any progress. So when we were writing the script for our story, we decided to use our words very carefully. That's not a room, that's a cell. That's not a progress unit, that's a solitary confinement. That's not a rehab facility or a special management facility, that's a prison because it's run as a prison. That's what we call our documentary Prison Kids. And the population that we're dealing with are children, regardless of the crime that they committed. I would like to finish my presentation with a study that I came across when I was preparing for this project. I found a study from 2001 that found that in 1998, we had some of the lowest juvenile crimes in the country in 25 years. But 62% of people thought that crime was on the rise. They were watching the news, and the first thing that they saw was a juvenile committing a crime. It's important for us to understand that sometimes the media is the only window that our audience has to these communities and to these issues. We can not only report on them, we can drive and change the conversation. Thank you so much.
Предполагам, чувате добре и без микрофон. Ще ви поканя да зададете своите максимално кратки, много добре подготвени, премислени, лаконични въпроси. Вие сте майстори на словото, така че няма да имате проблеми да формулирате и кратко да зададете своите въпроси. Ще имате възможност да чуете, според мен, изключително ценни съвети и сигурна съм, че има какво да попитате нашата лекторка. Добре, да повторя отново.
All right, now let me repeat, this time with the mic. I'd like to invite you to ask your brief questions to Connie Fauci, who will take them in the next 10 or even 20 minutes. She will respond to all the emotions, all the questions resulting from what we just saw.
So first of all, I want to thank you for your presentation. I think it was very interesting and very insightful. The question that I have for you, actually, I've had a bit of opportunity to work with children as well between the age of 3 and 12, especially working in brick factories in Nepal. And I guess my question for you, especially when you mentioned that some of these children are, heavily medicated, the ones that are facing the most difficult situations, psychologically, how do you prepare for that? And sort of what are the after effects of dealing with something like that?
Well, I think that you didn't get to see, the full piece of the documentary. I think it was the next segment where we feature some of these children actually who spent all that time incarcerated, and then, now they're released from prison and they're dealing with the effects of that. So we talked with a lot of experts before going into this story to see what was the best way to tackle this issue. We knew that these were vulnerable children. They suffer from mental illness. So we didn't want to explore this situation. So a lot had to do with us, spending time with them and kind of gaining their trust, and also talking to people who were very close to them so we understood them and we knew how to approach them in terms of mental illness. A lot of the children that we feature in our story were extremely open about their condition. They spoke very openly about what they were dealing with. In terms of how I personally, as a reporter, prepare for that, I can tell you that I have done all kinds of stories in the criminal justice system. This one was the hardest to do. And part of it is because you have to understand that you have your limits in terms of helping these children. Your job is to report the story and try to stay separate from their situation. And one of the hardest things to me, honestly, was the fact that they saw me and my colleague, Alisa Figueroa, who is my co-producer in this project, sort of like sometimes as a therapist, as someone who was finally listening to them. So it was hard for me, once we finished the project, to actually disconnect from these children because they had already built a trust and a relationship with you. So I think you play it day by day. I think you have to always have in the back of your mind that they're children, they're vulnerable, and also it's important that you build a relationship around the people who are close to them, so you know where to push, you know where to stop.
And just a very small follow-up question. And so do you still keep in touch with any of these children that you had the opportunity to work with post the documentary and everything? Is that still something that's going on?
Sadly, I haven't talked to some of these children, and sadly some of them went back to prison, to adult, were incarcerated after the release of our documentary. But I'm in touch with some of the advocate groups and some of their attorneys. And I know my friend Alyssa also kept in touch with Zion's mother, who's featuring the story at the beginning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to ask my question in Bulgarian. Connie, I'm really very happy to see you here, and I was really impressed by what I saw. I was a child myself, and I still remember this. I have 2 kids, and I would not like to see them in prison. My question, 2 things. What are the follow-on steps, if there are follow-on steps of this campaign? Whether closing juvenile institutions in the U.S. is a sustainable process. And my second question is, are you on your own in this fight? Do you have partners? Is there something similar to a national network for protection of children's rights in the U.S.? How politicians look at you, at your campaign? And if you have allies, and I hope you do, are you able to organize a larger campaign so that charges against children who skip classes would not put them in solitary confinement?
Thank you for your question. So a couple of things. We're definitely not alone in this issue. Actually, juvenile justice issue and raising awareness about them, there has been so many advocate groups and reporters who over the years have worked very hard to raise awareness about this issue. We were lucky in the sense that we had an administration that really has a focus on reforming, really, the criminal justice system, including the juvenile justice system. So President Obama actually implemented a series of steps in order to change and tackle mass incarceration in America. So we were lucky that that was a central topic of the administration at the time, because it really helped us to get some, politicians to participate in our story. Also, it helped the campaign. There was also incredible reporting that was done during that year. We featured earlier the case of Khalif Browder. He's a young man who committed suicide after spending 3 years in solitary confinement. That was a story that came out also around the time we released our documentary. So all of these things were happening simultaneously, and it really helped our campaign. In terms of the next steps, we have a new administration. And the reality is that for a lot of advocate groups, this administration can represent a tremendous setback for the progress that was made in terms of juvenile justice reform. We have to remember this is one of the few issues where there's actually bipartisan support. Right after we released a documentary, actually Senator Cory Booker, who was featured in our story, he worked with a bipartisan coalition to introduce a bill to also reduce the use of solitary confinement. So it's an issue that has the support of both Republicans and Democrats. However, the new administration has praised itself from being very tough on crime, and that's the type of messaging that we heard in the 80s and in the 90s that led to mass incarceration. So we have some challenges coming up. Our Attorney General right now, Jeff Sessions, for instance, has had very strong stance on juvenile crime. He has talked about, he was someone who actually supported the death penalty for children under 14 when he was an Attorney General in Alabama. So I think this administration can represent an important setback to the progress that was made during the Obama era. And that's why I think it's important to continue covering these issues, because as you saw, our perspective in 20 years changed. You know, back in the 90s and in the 80s, we saw those videos of President Clinton and the Speaker of the House being super tough on crime, and we feel outraged about it. But at that time, that was the popular mentality surrounding these issues. So we need to keep reporting on them in order to find progress. And hopefully, during this administration, we can continue to do that.
Други въпроси?
Any other questions? I would also ask my question in Bulgarian. First, I would like to thank you for the fact that this movie not only pinpoints the problems, but also showcases best example. You already answered my first question, what was the most difficult thing while you were working on the documentary. I have a second question. What were the biggest doubts you had as a journalist and a professional?
That's a really good question. It's not every day that we, as journalists, got to do a campaign, a national campaign about a specific issue. In fact, it was actually my first social campaign that we had done. So I think we were very hesitant at the very beginning to do a social campaign that was, you know, involve activists and community and members of the community, because we have never done it. But we have to understand, I think, as journalists, and this was a challenge that I have to deal with, that there are certain moments in your career that you have to take a stand. In solitary confinement, we had the reporting to support that solitary confinement only harms children. There was no one expert that we interviewed in the story who said, oh, this is great for children, or this is actually helping them to improve their conditions. All of them, including correctional officers, judges, and also advocate groups, talk to us about the severe impact that solitary confinement had on children. So I think the important thing is that you cannot take a stand all the time. You cannot do a social campaign for every single story that you do. But in this particular case, we decided to do a social campaign because we understood the importance of the issue. And we knew and we feel very comfortable that our reporting supported that. On top of that, we also try to keep it, you know, we had actually a social group in our team in Fusion. They dealt with organizing the events surrounding the campaign. They dealt with kind of like reaching out to people to get them engaged. But we were the ones feeding them the reporting. The facts that they were putting out there, we had to make sure that they were accurate. So to make my long answer short, I think the hardest part was where I had doubts, I think it was whether or not we did a campaign, because I'm a journalist and sometimes we have to kind of, you know, ask ourselves, am I going too far as a journalist in this particular issue? I'm very proud and happy that I made the decision to do it, because I think this is one of those issues where it matters to take a stand. Thank you.
Други въпроси?
Any other questions?
How much time did it take to prepare this report? What were the resources that you used to do it? How many people were in your team? What was the support you got from your media?
So it took about, I think, my colleague, Alyssa Figueroa, who was the film's director and my co-producer in this project, she started a couple months before I did, but it was a total of 10 months to put the story together. That involved 3 months of extensive traveling across America. And it was actually a pretty small team. We were 2 producers, Alyssa Figueroa and myself. We have 1 director of photography, not multiple. And we also have an associate producer and a production associate. So it was a relatively small team. The good thing, though, is that this was a very important project for the CEO of our company from Fusion, Isaac Lee. So he really gave us the resources in terms of, social media support to promote the film and producing digital stories for it. So we had that support. But generally speaking, it was a relatively small team.
Има ли още някой, който иска да попита?
Anyone else with a question? It would be interesting for me, having heard Connie's answer to the previous question, how did this film impact the image, the rating of your media and the social campaign? Because this will be a very good starting point for some of the discussions we're going to have today with some of the leading media, namely that the media are there not only to cover reality, but they can also generate a new reality. But how did this impact the image of the media that supported you and your team?
I think, the film was incredible, well received across the country. And it was well received from people from different sides of the spectrum. I remember, for instance, there were representatives of the Koch brothers, which is one of the top donors in the conservative arena, who were very supportive of the film and what they saw, because we provided the full context of the story, and they were not used to see that kind of coverage surrounding juvenile justice issues. So I think Fusion, I'm a testament of that. I'm here today with you in Bulgaria. We received a lot of support for the film from the families that were featured in the story and the children who were featured in the story, to groups that usually are not that supportive of this type of issues. I remember checking my email and seeing the amount of people from Democrats and Republicans who reached out to me and said, this is amazing. I had no idea that our children were put in solitary confinement under those conditions. I had no idea that it cost me so much to send these kids to prison. Because we tend to believe, I think, as a society, that if we just lock them up and we put them in silos, they're not going to bother us. That's not going to come back to us. And I think what was incredible about the film is that it helped to engage so many members of society from different trains of thought. So I think I would say that generally it was very well received.
Здравейте,
Good morning. Thank you for being with us. I'm Lydia Medarova, and my question has to do not so much with your professional background, but rather with your experience with institutions. How do institutions look at this problem, although, of course, they have to respect the law?
Are you referring to detention centers? So you're going to see some institutions that are going to have resistance to change. You are going to see some institutions that are going to say, well, we need solitary confinement because they are children who, are very aggressive, and we need to, separate them from the majority of children incarcerated. I don't think we're saying in our story that, children who commit the most serious crimes should not be held accountable at all. We are talking about the problem, I think, in America is that most of the children who are incarcerated for nonviolent offenses, is a vast majority of them. So I think we have to understand that the more time they spend in these settings, they're not rehabilitating, really. What they're doing is sometimes becoming more aggressive, more violent, because they have to respond to the environment they're dealing with. We actually, in our story, we visited a juvenile detention facility that was one of the most notorious and brutal facilities in the country a couple years ago, and they went through a process of reform. So they also wanted to show, you know, we were really bad, but we're actually making some progress, and they gave us full access to it. So I think there is sort of like a mixed reaction. There's some institutions who still believe that punishment should be the answer, and where correctional officers have a very tough attitude towards children. But generally speaking, we also find the other side of the spectrum, and New Orleans is a great example of that, a place that was brutal for children and now is a role model for the country. And actually Ohio, which is where most of our children spend time in solitary confinement, they have made so many reforms and now they're also a role model for the country. So you have a mixed reaction, I would say.
Може би е време за последен въпрос, ако имате такъв.
Maybe it's the time for one last question, if there is one, of course.
But I was wondering, just strictly from a legal standpoint, because I saw that you have some shots coming from the actual detention facilities, how difficult was it to get permission? Did you face any challenges with that, especially with the ones that are a bit more hard to get into, obviously, in film?
It's not easy to get into a detention center. I think if you're a journalist, you know that. It's actually really, really hard. And a lot of juvenile detention facilities will tell you, no, we can't do that because they're children. We cannot film juveniles. Remember, the records are sealed by law. We were able to enter into that detention center, I think it's because, you know, they have gone through reform. So they wanted to show how they're doing right now. So that really helped us. But when we were in that detention center, I don't know if you noticed, we blurred some of the faces of some of the children. And we have to blur all of them who were juveniles, so who were charged as juveniles. The only ones that we show are young men who actually were charged as adults. Those are the only ones that we were able to interview, and those are the only ones that we were able to show on camera. We also, I don't think you got to see it, but we also visit a school that is like a community diversion programs. Children there are like 8, 9, extremely difficult. So we also have to blur everybody's faces for that one. We only show Cyan, who was our character, and of course we have the permission of his mother. So yeah, I mean, legally, it was a very challenging project. I think I'm very lucky that in Fusion, we had a very strong legal and standards team, and we literally have tons of meetings just going through the video and making sure that everything was blurred. We also have tons of meetings where we have to go line by line about the facts that we were reporting on the story. So we had the support, I think, from our legal and standards team, but it was definitely not an easy one.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your interest, for being so interactive and involved. Thank you very much, Connie Fossey, and I hope Connie will not mind if there are further questions during the coffee break in a more informal environment. Thank you very much. And next we have Tamana Rahman, our second special guest today. We're extremely happy to have someone who has the award for young journalist. He has been nominated for investigative journalism for covering up racism in the UK. Rahman is the director and producer of by BBC, Children Abusing Children. The video is part of the Panorama program investigating the hidden world of sexual abuse between children. A lot of topics are covered in this film, and I'm pretty much sure that there will be another extensive discussion resulting from what Tamana is going to present right now. Thank you very much, and you have the floor.
Hi, good morning, and thank you for inviting me to this very prestigious event. I'm very honoured to be here to talk about my film. When Kids Abuse Kids is a film that I was asked to make by BBC Panorama in April last year. There'd been a few reports talking about children being abused by their classmates, specifically on school premises, and now Panorama and I wanted to take a look at it in more detail. We had managed to find, through lawyers and charities, a number of case studies of children who were willing to speak out and describe the sexual abuse that they had experienced. And in the end, what we did was we covered 4 stories that represented a cross-section of the sort of cases that we came across. The first person that we spoke to was Danny. She had been sexually assaulted by a family friend since the age of 10. This boy would come to her house with his mum and his dad, and they would be left alone, as children often are. He would sexually assault her, gradually at first, taking her into wardrobes, playing hide and seek, etc., touching her inappropriately, and finally it got to the point where she was forced to perform oral sex on him a number of times. Danny didn't want to hang around with him, but her mum thought she was being silly. You have children, they come around and play. Obviously, what you want to do is for them to be sociable. So she was forced to be in a situation where she was playing with this boy and actually at the same time being sexually assaulted by him. It wasn't until she... Can you still hear me? Sorry. It wasn't until she was 15 and she was literally at breaking point that she did, in fact, break down at school and eventually tell her mum. The second person that we covered in the film was Emily. Now, she was being messaged by a boy in her year on her phone via social media. He was sending her inappropriate sexual messages. But she didn't think anything of it. She didn't really think that there was anything wrong with those messages. She didn't reciprocate. She didn't actually respond to those messages. But sexualized messages are so normal in school now, and this was part of the problem. And it was actually in a classroom, in a full classroom of students, that he ended up poking her in the vagina several times. She asked him to stop. He wouldn't, and he ended up putting his hand up her skirt and penetrated her. Susan, now she was in a relationship with a boy in her class. They were boyfriend and girlfriend. And she'd had sex with him willingly the first time around when they were about 14 years old. But then she had a pregnancy scare, and she didn't want to do it anymore because she was worried. But she thought because they were in a relationship and she'd given consent once, that she was never allowed to refuse him again. Now, they ended up splitting up, but he would still sexually harass her in the classroom, grope her, touch her, and he ended up raping her twice. The first time, she didn't even realize that what he had done was rape, because she didn't understand what sexual consent was. Actually, what it was in a party. She was drunk, and he took her aside to an alleyway and raped her there. And she didn't realize that was rape, because she thought that because she'd given consent when they were in a relationship, it was okay. And finally, Bella. Now, Bella was 6 years old when she was being assaulted on a daily basis for about 2 months by 2 boys in her school, in the playground. And we spoke to her parents, because obviously she was too young for us to speak to. Now, each of our cases shared some really strong similarities. Most of the children were too scared to tell their parents because they felt ashamed, they felt stupid, they felt that it was their fault. When they did report their assault to teachers, the teachers had no idea how to deal with either the victim or the person they were accusing, because often they were at the same school. They weren't always at the same school, often they were. And sometimes they would still be in the same classes. In fact, in one of our cases, which I'll show you a short clip, she was forced to be in the same room as him doing an exam. In another case, one of the girls was actually made to sit on the same table. There'd actually been a court case that had happened. He'd come back from the court case, and she was made to sit on the same table as him. They all felt failed by the authorities, whether it was the teachers or the court cases or the police. And additionally, one of the things that I found striking was that their classmates in particular were a big problem. They didn't always believe the story. They very rarely believed the girls. And they would end up bullying the victim because she was a grass. She was telling other adults about what their schoolmates had done. And also, even though the teachers were supposed to keep it private, even though the kids tried to keep it private, it's a school. And in school, the word gets out. Now, the problem of children sexually abusing each other is one that's existed for a long time. I'd probably guess that some people here have experienced it or maybe know other children who have been sexually assaulted, maybe in a minor way, maybe even more, or, you know, even themselves personally. There's nothing particularly new about this thing happening. But what did seem to alarm many charities and police forces that we spoke to was how much more commonly it was cropping up. And this is one of the reasons why we wanted to do the film, and also the different types of things that children are now doing to each other. And in the end, what we found was, through our reporting, that even though in the UK it had never been measured before, this is not something that the UK regularly collates, this is not information that people have recorded for a long time, is that there was an enormous increase in the number of reports in the previous 4 years. So we did a Freedom of Information request from 4 years, and we found that there was a 71% increase, 30,000 cases within 4 years. More than 2,500 incidents took place on school property. I'm talking about serious sexual assault here. This is rape, this is groping, this is inappropriate contact, this isn't random pinging on bras. This is actual serious offences that people had been reporting to police. There was a significant number of gang assaults, and most worryingly of all, and most unexpectedly for us, and this is something that we weren't expecting when we sent out the Freedom of Information request, was a growing number of children under the age of 10 who had been reported for sexual assault. And I believe all of these numbers are probably a conservative figure. Many children won't report their abuse, you know, for a variety of reasons. Maybe they feel that the teachers won't do anything, and rightly, as we found in the documentary, and also because of fear of their reaction, etc. And also for the children under 10, we found that in our case, that the police didn't even record the fact that they had committed this crime. Now, it's interesting from Connie's film. You had a case where the police were locking up children who hadn't committed any crimes in the UK. In this particular example, because they were under the age of legal responsibility, they were 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Nothing happened to them. The social services may have got involved. Sometimes they didn't, and essentially nothing would happen. What the children who were abused had to do, their parents said to them, look, if you want to do anything about this, if you want to make a difference, then the only thing we're going to have to ask you to do is you have to move school, you have to move locations. If you want to get away from this child who has sexually abused your children, you're the one who has to make the difference, not the authorities. And we found that there were boys and girls who suffered as a result of sexual abuse. Around 1 in 4 victims was boys, even though most of the perpetrators, around 90%, were boys themselves. This is not a story that affects just schools, though, and this is one of the things that I wanted to make it really clear in the film, is that it happens at home too, and it happens outside of the school premises. In fact, the statistics show that it happens mostly outside of the schools, and it's a wider problem that we seem to be facing in our communities. Now, how do I tell this story? How do we tell this story? We knew we had a really big responsibility to all of the children that we've spoken to. We very specifically only approached them via charities and law firms. We purposefully wanted to speak to children and young people who had already tried to get help and hadn't really got anywhere. And we asked the charity, and the way that we did it, the way that we tried to get their stories, is we asked the charity or the law firms to send a brief of their clients who might be willing to speak to us. And then only once we decided that we wanted to cover their stories did we ask to approach them directly. And we made a decision that if we were going to find out about their stories, if these children, if we were going to approach them as journalists, if we were going to visit them in their houses, if we were going to make them tell their trauma again, that we would tell their story. So this is a really big piece of, this is a really big strategy that we had, and that's part of the BBC strategy as well, that if you're going to make people relive their trauma, then you have to give them the respect to tell their story. And obviously, there were many obstacles on the path to making this film, the main one being anonymity. How do you tell a compelling story about an important issue when you can't show anybody's face? How do you protect children and young people who have taken part once it's been on air? What are their rights and what are our responsibilities? Now, this section speaks quite a bit to some of the work that Bulgaria is doing at the moment. one of the primary goals was to allow young people to speak and to tell us what they had gone through. They had a right to have their voices heard, and they did want to have their voices heard, even if they didn't want their faces to be on the screen. And that's because it was dismissed by so many, whether it was the teachers, whether it was the police, whether it was the social services, if it was doctors, they were dismissed by so many. They wanted the opportunity to speak, and we needed, and as journalists, we needed to give them that opportunity. Under UK law, there's an automatic right to anonymity as soon as an offence is reported. It doesn't matter who it's reported to. That meant we couldn't include anything that would lead to anyone realising who was telling the story, including siblings, friends, teachers, even the person who had assaulted them. There was one person who had not told her brother that she had been sexually assaulted. So we had to make sure that we were going to be able to tell her story and keep her anonymous. They had to be treated with respect and dignity. That meant getting all of the details of their case without pressurizing them. It meant asking them at all stages if they were happy with what they were doing and what they were saying. Sometimes that meant that they didn't want to be interviewed in the same room as their parent. Now, their parent knew the details of what had happened to them because they had heard it from police, they'd heard it from the lawyer's charity, but the child themselves couldn't say it in front of their parent. So in one case, we have to send the mother out of the room. And in other cases, as the case with the 6-year-old with Bella, it meant not interviewing her at all. She's slightly older now, but you cannot interview a child and get them to tell you that story of their sexual abuse because it's a trauma, because we're not therapists at that age. So all of the children that we interviewed, actually, they were over 16 and they were able to give their consent. Our young people had abused.
Моите хора, младежите в нашия филм са били насилвани понякога много дълго, по няколко години. И няма как една такава история справедливо да се покаже в половин-часово предаване. Аз трябваше да бъда съвсем честна, да им кажа какво ще включим във филма, какво не, колко време ще им отделим. Трябваше да променим и някои детайлите, защото особено когато си дете, ти винаги очакваш някой да ти реши проблемите, да направи нещата по-добре за теб. Ние трябваше да отговорим на тези очаквания.
They understood and they appreciated the respect that we gave them. And finally, in the 21st century, the one thing that we all have to manage now is social media. Will people judge our case studies for being promiscuous, for example? Is somebody going to judge that 14-year-old for having sex? We know it happens, but she could also get trolled online, even if her name is not on screen, even if you can't tell. Just the fact that you're reading that kind of stuff online, that could be traumatic for our children. So one of the things that we said to them was, look, can you please stay off social media, at least for a few days, while the heat dies down. Now, to be fair, I don't think any of our young people listen to our advice on the Twitter front. As you can imagine, people want to know what the response to various programs will be, and luckily, there wasn't anything particularly horrific, but at the very least, I had to warn them. We had to warn them, and we had to take responsibility for looking after them if anything did happen afterwards. So how did we do it? How did I tell the story of 4 young girls while keeping their anonymity? Well, for me, it was always going to be a combination of a few things. So if you could play the first clip, please.
She found it impossible to concentrate.
I had to take a GCSE exam in the same room as him, and it were really weird because I obviously knew that he was in that room, and I started smelling him, and as soon as I smelt him, everything came back and I'd relive everything, and I couldn't focus on the exam. And the thing is, I need that exam to get me out of that school and to get me away from him.
So that's just a very short clip of one of the devices that I used. And you know, the first thing that we did was to change their name. And we actually used actors to speak their words verbatim. We'd film behind them, we'd film the backs of their heads or their silhouette. Now, this is a very common way of concealing identities. I'm sure many of you have done this sort of thing in the past yourself. And I had the added complication of not being able to show their mouths because we thought that some of them were too distinctive. There may have been acne on their faces, there might have been strange scars. A brother might recognize a mouth, an aunt might recognize the way that someone's teeth is aligned. Even you know, fingernails, I had to check them when I went to interview them. I had to check that they didn't have any distinguishing marks on their hands. In fact, we did actually blur one of the mother's hands because she had a scar. And then their identity, we added wigs. We gave them new clothes because people recognize clothes. We interviewed them in houses and buildings that did not belong to them in cities far away from where they lived. We changed the way they held their pens and how they wrote. In that little clip that you saw, that is not Danny's handwriting. That is not the way that she writes. You know, and we were very lucky that, I mean, that is not her school either. We were very lucky in the location that we had that it was actually exam season, so we didn't have to pay extra for the location. And then their story as well, we changed small details. One of the girls who was assaulted in the classroom, she was poked in the vagina with an implement. We said that this was on a school day in a full school classroom. We said that she was poked with a ruler. She wasn't poked with a ruler. You know, it wasn't during a normal home visit that Danny was made to perform oral sex in the bathroom. You know, we changed ages. We took out enough detail without losing any of the actual truth. And that's because we didn't want the young person who had committed the act to be able to tell that this was the person that we were featuring on the film. So that's how important the issue of protecting the anonymity that the BBC takes. But I always wanted the actual girls. So these are the actual girls, to recreate some of what they experienced so that it would feel more real. I didn't want it. We're already so far removed with clothes. We're already so far removed with their voices. Actually, to have them there with their expressions, with the way that they move, for me, that was important. And obviously, I didn't get them to recreate any explicit parts, but things like being in a school, sitting on a bus, this was part of their identity. It was something that would enable the audience to remember what the stories are, because it's very difficult when you can't see their faces to try and remember the details of the stories. So it was a kind of reconstruction. And I asked the girls several times if they minded, do you mind walking down the street? Do you mind recreating the fact that you were in an exam room? And they were like, no, that's fine. And then the next thing, which I'm most proud of in terms of how to tell this story, is this particular device. So if you could play the second clip, please.
Bella told her mother that 2 boys had been assaulting her in the school playground for the last 6 weeks.
Bella was subjected to daily digital rape, which means they would use their fingers to rape her anally and vaginally, repeatedly. And she couldn't sit down because they'd hurt her so badly the day before.
Again, just a very short clip. Bella's was actually one of the very first stories that I heard. In fact, I think her mother was the very first person that I went to go and interview. And I knew immediately when I was listening to her story that I wanted drawings. The idea of art as therapy is something that's quite common, and I really wanted that for her story. And I wanted it because even though you wouldn't hear her speak, you could still understand her emotions through drawings that she could have done herself. Now she didn't draw those. She didn't draw this. It took somebody very, very talented to do the animations for this. I spoke to dozens of animators. I found one artist who understood what I was trying to achieve and who could also carry on the animation, the kind of graphic novel style for each of the different case studies. And I used different backgrounds for each story. You know, white background, yellow background, black background, just so that, again, the audience could continue to remember who each of these stories were. But even things in the animation, there were subtle things that we changed. For example, the gender of the teachers in the room, the type of room it was. These are all kind of, these are all sort of subconscious things that we were, bits of information that we were putting into the film so that the audience would have one particular view. That wasn't actually true in order to sort of deflect attention from the specific details. And as journalists, there was another problem that we faced. How do we verify the stories? How can we tell that these children are telling the truth if going to approach the key players means that we automatically break their right to anonymity? You can't go to a teacher and say, look, did you do this? Did you hear the story from this girl and still put her in the same class as the person who raped her? You can't do that because you know that you've broken her anonymity. You know that they will know that when Panorama does a story, it will feature her story. And the answer to that is you can never really tell. In the absence of any forensic report, of which there's often very little, you can never really tell. But the vast majority of people who report sexual abuse are not lying. That is a fact. And furthermore, as I mentioned, we didn't seek out any of these case studies. These brave people had already reported their abuse to other officials or to authorities. Not that there's anything wrong with them coming directly to you, but this was an added layer of security that we had. And there's one final thing that I want to say, and that is that other children were used in this film. Because I really wanted to, I didn't want to make a film with just hands or with just cartoons. I wanted the impact that this sort of abuse has on children to be out there in the forefront. And so I got a selection of different children from different ages to come and talk about the kind of experiences that they have in school. And so none of these kids were admitted to being sexually abused. That was very, very important. We couldn't allow them to admit that. And the duty of care to them was also very important in terms of what they were telling us. They talked about the type of everyday harassment that they face in general life, usually in school. Pinging bra straps, lifting up skirts, hands in inappropriate places, catcalls. This is one girl. She's 12 years old when we interviewed her, and she told us that in her school, porn is openly passed around on mobile phones, and young girls are groped, and the teachers don't really do anything about it. So, beneath the problem of serious sexual assault lies an even bigger problem of low-level sexual harassment that young people are facing, both young boys and women. It's part of the whole Me Too campaign that we see. It's been there from a very, very young age for the vast majority of people. And the reasons for this are not properly quantified, they're not properly understood. Within the program, we didn't really say to people, this is what we think the answer is, this is what the cause is, because nobody really properly has definitively said, this is one of the causes. People talk about mobile phone technology, people talk about access to the internet. That's certainly one of the drivers, but it's not necessarily the cause, because obviously this is something that's been going on for a long time. But it was important for me that those voices of low-level sexual harassment that young people are facing, especially young girls, they're heard too, in order to understand the environment that many young people are now growing up in. Thank you.
Готови ли сте със своите въпроси?
Are you ready now with your questions for Tamana? Thank you. Thank you very much for this film, which asks so many important questions. From it, I understood that teachers at school feel secure when it comes to an adult abuser, but they're very insecure when it comes to a child abuser. What did they share with you? What were their doubts? Maybe they look at both children as victims, or they want to have both children try to protect them because they're their students. Do they feel guilt about what's happening in their classes? Did these teachers get any help from professional psychologists, or were they alone in dealing with this?
No, the issue of teachers in particular is one that I found very frustrating. There are some teachers who do an excellent job, and in fact we spoke to two teachers in the film, and they talked about the kind of guidance that they had from their school, but actually the onus, the responsibility for how you manage sexual assault between two young people is basically abdicated to the school itself. So individual schools have to try and work out some sort of formula of reporting, and it's left up to the school's own devices, really. And many schools don't have the training, they don't have the expertise to deal with this kind of stuff, because you're right, when it comes to adults sexually abusing children, there is some it's not great. It's not. It's still far from perfect, but there is some sort of process that you have to go through. With children, there's literally nothing. There's very little guidance whatsoever. And in fact, there's one of the things that happened as a result of this film, I think, and pressure from lots of other people, is that the government did release some guidance saying, look, if you have children who have accused others of sexual assault, this is the sort of thing that you should be doing, which is great. They released that in December last year. But it's very hit and miss. One of the girls, so Susan, she was raped at a party. She was a girl who was in a relationship with this boy and then split up with him. She was at a party, she was raped. She went to, she thought about what happened, and she went to the teacher about a week later, and she said to the teacher, look, I've had this really terrible experience. Like I said, she didn't realize it was rape. She went to the teacher and she said, look, this boy's raped me. Sorry, this thing has happened to me. And this is the head of year. This is not some low-level form tutor or anything. This is a head of year who's got a serious amount of responsibility. And she explained what happened. And the teacher listened to her and said, okay, that's really terrible. You should keep away from him. Try and keep away from him. So what we found through, and in fact, with one of the other girls, with Emily, for example, who was penetrated in the classroom, she went to the teacher, to the head teacher again, and she was being bullied because like several other children had seen what happened. She went to the teacher, to the head teacher, and said, "Look, this thing has happened. What are you going to do about it?" He was just like, "Well, there's not really very much I can do." He was suspended for a few days, but essentially she was bullied massively by all these other kids. She'd walk down the street and she'd have people crying out, you know, "You're a liar, you're a grass." Grass is like a version of somebody who's like a traitor, essentially. And basically, when the boy came back to school, he was allowed to carry on as normal because people supported him, but she was isolated. She was kept aside. She had to go to classrooms on her own. She had to be escorted to and from school. So teachers really have no clue, and there's not very much that's changed. I mean, the film only came out in October last year, but there's a really serious problem with how teachers manage this, and it's not necessarily their fault because that's not the expertise of teachers. They're not supposed to have to deal with this kind of stuff, but it happens, and there needs to be a concerted effort from policymakers to give guidance on this because it happens very often. I mean, you're talking about 2,500 rapes. I think it was about 250 rapes on school property. In fact, one of the teachers that we spoke to, I'd been having a chat with her, and she said, "Look, I did want to do the interview with you today. I can't do an interview with you today because I'm having to deal with a situation where on a sports field, a girl who's probably about 12 or 13 years old had been gang raped on that very day." So this is not an issue that teachers really know very much what to do with, and they need as much support and help as they can. But equally, some are clearly complete. I mean, some of this is just common sense, and they're failing in that respect as well.
Други въпроси?
Are there any other questions?
My name is Simona Veleva and I'm a lawyer in the field of media law, and I wanted to ask you a couple of questions. My first question is, did you need legal support and where did you get it from? And my second question is, you show us here 4 cases. How many cases did you have to choose from? Were there numerous cases you went through, you discussed, you interviewed? And my last question is, do you think those movies should be broadcasted also in schools? That accounts for both of the movies. Do you think they are educational and they should be broadcasted in every school every year? Because I think they put the spotlight on a very specific problem and they are also educational. Thank you.
Thanks for your question again. Some really good questions. Yeah, I mean, legally, I had to take enormous amounts of advice from the BBC's internal legal team. You know, that whole, as soon as you start to bring in court cases, as soon as you start to bring in, you know, sexual assault, you know, anonymity. You just have to blur people. You have to, even that I told you about the steps that we took to protect the identities of the people, whether it's physically or through the details of their story. This was the legal advice that we had to take. It was crazy. There was, we even in the houses that we filmed, we took some exterior shots and we had to, this is not their house, this is not their house, but we had to take those shots out just in case anybody thought that it was their house. So yeah, I mean, huge amounts of legal advice. In relation to the number of cases that we had, and I sort of briefly touched on it beforehand. So the research period for this had started a few months before I had arrived with the researcher, and she had compiled through talking to lawyers, through talking to charities, probably about 30 different cases. What the charity workers had done was they had said, look, these are the cases that we have. This is a brief breakdown of their story. And that's just so that, because they know the detail of the story, we don't need to find out the detail of the story directly from the kids themselves. We don't need to make them go through that trauma, especially if we're not going to use them. So there's probably around 20, 25 cases. I looked at each of them, had a chat with the executive, and worked out together, look, these are the stories that will tell us kind of most, I guess, just give us the general kind of narrative that we wanted to put through. So yeah, we whittled it down to 4. And then your final question, sorry, was again?
It was, do you think for both of the movies, do you think they should be broadcasted at schools?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, for 2 reasons really. One, because teachers, I think teachers need to feel that that there is a process that they can kind of work through. So I think just on the teacher level, they should watch the program, but also for the children, because again, one of the things that we filmed was we went to a school, we spoke to a classroom full of children, we talked about the issue of consent, we talked about the issue of understanding what it means to be in a relationship, what it means to have interaction with the opposite sex or with the same sex, and many children had no idea, and partly it's to do with the prevalence of porn. It's to do with social media. It's to do with programs like, Keeping Up with the Kardashians, or we've got like a number of different kind of, I don't know, like Jersey Shore, or, these other kind of American, like, sorry to say this, kind of like quite Americanized style of programming where you're dressed in very revealing clothes and you have these kind of very open relationships. But without really understanding the boundaries when you're very, very young of what that means. So I think, and we also showed a charity which goes around schools trying to teach people, look, this is acceptable. This is something that you can say to a young person. This is what you can't. For example, the question of, and it's so important now, with all the recent stuff. The question of if you're trying to initiate a relationship with somebody, if you're trying to initiate physical contact, as in sex, with another person, if they're silent, does that count as consent? What if they're like a little bit shy? And like a lot of the children were just like, well, if they're not saying anything, it's probably they're okay with it. And that's the attitude that's prevalent with a lot of young people. I guess that's part of the problem, really. It's like a multitude of different issues that come together where young people are getting their information about relationships from the internet, from social media, and they're missing out on what it means to interact, on a human level, and understanding how you're supposed to do that. It's a weird thing. The teachers that I spoke to were telling me as well that the boys in particular would come up to the girls and basically just put their arms around them, and like the girls would be like really, really uncomfortable and struggling to get away. But they didn't feel that they could tell the guys that they weren't happy, because that's like spoiling the fun. And I think that if young people are alerted to the fact that yes, you have the right to say no without coming across like a prude, or without coming across as somebody who's spoiling a fun environment, then that's an important tool for them to have.
Да. Последен ли въпрос е добре?
Hello, I'm Maria, a journalist with Nova TV Bulgaria. I noticed that one of the children's shows is with her face, but you said that you didn't want to cover only hands and backs. So what happened with this girl after you broadcast the movie? What was the attitude in her school? And the other question, how did you approach interviewing the children, because they had to go back to such traumatic experience?
Say showing the face of the girl, do you mean the last girl that I... Okay, so she's one of maybe about eight people that we interviewed. So because of the style that we had done it, if she had been... So this was a legal issue for us as well. If we had only featured her, then that would have been very problematic, because obviously she would have been the only face in the entire film, and that would have been wrong as well. So there's about 8 other people, and they were talking generally about what happens in their school. So we took advice, and in general, I mean, I didn't want to have just one person anyway, so she was a range of people. And we spoke to all of the kids after the program broadcast to make sure that they were okay, to make sure that they were happy with their contribution. So she was fine. And also, there were certain things, again, we didn't put her name on the screen. I don't even think we put her age on the screen. Just again to kind of push away from kind of identifying her. But also, I mean, she's 12 years old, but she's very, very savvy, and she wanted to say this stuff. She was very strong. She came with her mum to the interview, and she was like, do you know what? I need to speak up about this because I'm so horrified by it. And the second question was, I've forgotten because I have a very bad memory.
How did you approach interviewing children?
The interview approach it varied between the different people. So with a 6-year-old, for example, with Bella, she came via a legal team. So we spoke to the lawyers and then got through to the parents with that. With Danny, for example, she was eventually forced to perform oral sex on her family friend over a period of time. She was approached through a charity initially. Then we spoke to her mum. Her mum had a chat with us. We went through the details, and then eventually I met her at an airport. Just randomly, that's the only time that she's available. And just got to know her, because one of the things that the children also said was that when they had told their stories to the police or to the teachers, often the teachers and the police didn't want to know the details. So I think at least with Danny, she felt for the first time that she was being heard by somebody outside. So that was via a parent. Same with Emily, who was penetrated in the classroom. Her uncle and her mum were both in the room with us. And with Susan, who was raped twice by her boyfriend, we initially went through a charity, and they sat with us to make sure that we weren't going to fool around with her through the initial kind of interview process. With all of them, we visited them like 2 or 3 times beforehand. Susan didn't want her mum to hear the story. Danny didn't want her mum to hear the story. Emily was happy for her family member to be there. So you have to take your direction from the children themselves, because they'll know what's coming. I mean, in fact, with Danny, she was the one who was in that film in the classroom. I didn't actually realise, because I initially interviewed her with her mum in the airport, as I said, and she didn't give me all the details because I didn't want her to keep repeating that story. So, I knew the bare bones of her case, but I didn't want her to go through it all again. I wanted the actual detail to come out on camera, so she only really had to tell me the story once in full detail. And we were doing the interview in this house, and she was really hesitant, and she wasn't telling me the details, and I was like, I don't really understand what's going on here. Why is she not kind of revealing? I have all this information, but she's not giving me the details. And then it just suddenly clocked. I was just like, are you uncomfortable? Do you want me to? Would you prefer it if your mum wasn't here? And she's like, yeah, I would. And she was the second person that I interviewed. Obviously, Bella's parents was the first, and so after that, this was a learning process for me as well. I had to say to each of the kids, who do you want in the room? And in fact, all of our crew were female as well, just to make it, comfortable for them. And I did ask them, look, do you mind if there's a male crew member? Most of them, if we were going to employ somebody, we said if we were going to employ a male, kind of grip or sound man or something like that, we would have to ask permission from the girls themselves. Do you mind if there's a male in the room? And they were like, that's fine.
Are there any more questions, or we should just thank... this was not a guidebook, this was a real manual. Everything that we heard was really impressive. Are there any more questions? I would like to ask something which is a kind of follow-on from your answer. What is the place of the psychologist? Did you have a multi-sectoral team? How you got prepared? Did you involve psychologists? And last but not least, you as a journalist, have you worked with a psychologist? Because we see very well-balanced coverage for us as viewers, and I expect that you have heard shocking stories.
So with psychologists, for the team, now we heard some really harrowing stories. I mean, the amount of things that, because a lot of young people, you're talking about 6-7-year-old children in some cases, they were copying things that they'd seen in quite hardcore pornography. And the violence with which some of this stuff was happening. I mean, even that case of, I was telling you about the teachers telling me about the girl being gang raped on the school playing field that day. That was just like, it's just really, really horrific. It's very hard as a human, to separate yourself from that. So the BBC did provide us with a psychologist, if we wanted to take advantage of that. And I made sure that everybody who was in the team and who was going to be brought onto the team, even the animator, for example, I mean, he didn't have all of the details of the stories, but he heard enough to kind of make him very upset. Was offered, this resource should he seek to take advantage of it. I mean, I didn't, because I think partly it's as with Connie, you sort of separate yourself as a journalist when you're hearing these really terrible stories. Probably I'll be very disturbed when I'm older with all these horrific kind of stories and experiences in my head. But on a personal level, I don't think anybody in the team actually took the psychologist's kind of offer up. With the kids that, and the other thing is, again, this was a benefit of doing something via a charity or via a legal team, is that they had often gone through therapy themselves. Now, what we had, and what was very clear is that there isn't that support that exists for young people. So if you are a kid who's experienced sexual assault or sexual abuse, our government, our social institutions are not really there, are not really capable of protecting that child. So it's only because the parents themselves pushed forward in all of those cases, in fact, to get therapy, that those girls had got therapy. So we didn't have to do that. It was something that the parents pushed for themselves. So we didn't have to worry about that. But I think had a child come to us directly and we were the first ones that they reported this incident too, there's a very specific protocol that we have to go through as journalists. If we are the first people that sexual abuse is reported to, then we have to go to the child protection team at the BBC, and then there would be a case of therapy, of psychologist, etc. In that case, with Chloe, who was the girl at the end, and I think I got about 20 kids together because I wanted to get an idea of what their experiences were. Brought them from all across the world to come and do these, kind of down the camera interviews. I mean, I had never really properly spoken to them before. I didn't know what their personal experiences were. All I knew was that they had, you know, some strong things to say about what they're experiencing in school. But on the off chance, just in case they revealed to us, either personally or on camera, that something had happened to them, we had a child psychologist in place. We had employed somebody to come and basically make sure that there was you know, an outlet for them to kind of go forward. You know, and that's really as much as I think we can do, which is to point them in the right direction. As journalists, we're not there to be therapists, but it's important for us to keep in contact with them and to, you know, kind of make sure that they're getting the right kind of support.
Да, заповядайте. All right, thank you. And also thank you for the eye-opening and thought-provoking movie, both to you and Connie. And thank you for giving me the right to last word. I won't keep you away from the lunch break, or should I say coffee pause. Just very briefly, I was wondering whether you either perceive the issue or at least explore the possibility of viewing those cases as from the perspective of equality. According to Bulgarian law, sexual harassment is a form of discrimination. And we saw this more clearly in Connie's movie, but very often we have, when we talk about gross human rights abuses, we also have a question of overlapping or intersecting inequalities. Perhaps some of those kids, where we saw that all of the kids are from a particular gender, but they also might belong to a particular ethnic, language, or religious minority, or be from a particular socioeconomic status. So this was my final question.
Oh no, I think the intersectionality question is really important. It's very difficult to answer because the statistics don't really exist. Our questions, we had a number of questions that we asked all of the police forces in England and Wales, and we asked specifically about gender. We didn't ask about class because I don't think that information exists within the police forces. We didn't ask about ethnicity. Perhaps we should have. What we found was that 3 out of 4 of the people who reported abuse were women. And actually, one of the things that I felt really bad about in this program was that I wasn't able to explore the male experience, but there just wasn't time, and sadly, you know, that was one of the things that we just had to decide from the very beginning. And also because the case studies weren't there as well. It's actually much harder, I think, in many cases for boys to come forward because it's not seen in you know, it's not the masculine thing to do. So that was really the primary reason. So 3 out of 4 of the victims were girls. 90%, I think over 90%, in fact, of the perpetrators were boys. So, I mean, in terms of kind of gender inequality, yeah, I mean, that's obviously an issue. You know, some of the teachers would, you know, they find it very difficult to distinguish between what's playful behavior and what's not. You know, with Danny, for example, with Susan, the girl who was raped twice, he would, even though they were split up, and the thing is, this is to do with the complexity of being in a relationship when you're that age. You want to try and please people around you, right? You want to have a boyfriend, you want to be loved, and you're not really sure how those relationships work. You're not really sure what the boundaries are. So she'd split up from him on this one occasion, but he'd come and sit next to her, he'd put his arms around her, he'd be very, very physical with her right in front of the teacher. And the teacher would say, okay, right, leave the room, to the boy. But then he would do the same thing again the following day, and he'd do the same thing in the corridors, and the teachers just weren't doing anything about it. And I don't know if that's because they think that's just boys being boys. I'm not really sure of that, but certainly, you know, there is this, there did seem to be this attitude that these complaints don't matter, that these, you know, these are small, minor things, and they've probably got other things to, you know, think about and worry about. And if you don't know, if you're not really even, you know, if it's normalized, then how do you change it if it just is something that's existed for such a long time? And then on the issue of race and ethnicity, you know, if it's to do with the case studies that we had, all of the girls in our case study were white. I'd say probably all of them were middle class. And I think that might be to do with different institutions being available to give support to those people. And it's also to do with maybe socioeconomic background. So if you're a middle class parent, for example, you might push to find out what services are available. Whereas if you're from a lower socioeconomic background, if you're from an ethnic minority, those avenues might not be available to you, or you might not be aware that they're available to you. So we were led very much on the case studies that we had, but I'm sure, you know, it happens to people from across the spectrum.
Много благодаря на всички отново за
Thank you very much. I can hear that in the room next door there is very serious applause. So I'd like to applaud our guests in our turn. Thank you, Connie. Thank you, Tamana, for being with us. This interaction meeting has been extremely important for you as professionals. Now it is time for a coffee break. Before that, allow me to mention a few important things. Coffee break should not exceed 20 minutes. So far, we've been very much in time, so it is important to kind of stick to our timing. So please make sure to come back in 20 minutes. Special thanks to Hope Restaurant for catering for this conference, and they support a network of residential type facilities for young people leaving specialized institutions for young people without parental care, allowing them to build up skills for independent living. Thank you for your support. If you have any questions on the program, you can also, about this program, you can talk to the people from the catering. Let's get back here in 20 minutes with very interesting footage and, of course, the guidebook we are going to present, and we really believe it is precious, invaluable help for all journalists working towards the ethical coverage of children.
Изключително ви благодаря за това, че сте тук, защото никак не ни се иска да играем този мач на празен терен, защото е много важен. Така че благодаря на всички. Виждам даже хора, които дойдоха специално за този панел. Истината да се притеснявам като никога, аз не се притеснявам обикновено, говорейки пред публика, е, че проекта по създаването на пътеводителя "Децата и медиите. Мисия етично отразяване" е едно от най-смислените неща, които съм правила в последните няколко години. И когато ми се обадиха от екипа на АЕЖ и UNICEF, бях изключително вдъхновена, когато се срещнах с, според мен, и от най-добрите професионалисти от гилдията, не само журналисти и пиар специалисти, и рекламисти, и юристи. Се оказа, че ни предстоят много интересни, трудни понякога, много ползотворни работни срещи.
Very interactive meetings, and sometimes we as journalists, when we think about our profession, whether it has come to lose value or lose the trust of the people. Is it possible to raise our own standards in covering children? I think that this shared experience and the shared effort made it an exceptional experience. Let me say that this project is meant for those working in TV, radio, online, or print media. There is a special chapter on the photo and video recording of children, and the last chapter is designed for PR experts and advertisers. We are happy to have among our panelists people from this profession. So thank you once again for being here. And now let us see a very short video showing our work and how this project was implemented.
Думите са най-силното оръжие в ръцете на медиите. Словото едновременно може да помогне
или да нанесе непоправими вреди на засегнатите, ако е използвано некоректно. Това важи в пълна сила при отразяването на теми, свързани с деца.
Всяко дете е неотменим носител на права, подробно разписани в Конвенцията на ООН за правата на детето. Децата могат свободно да изразяват мнение по всички въпроси от техен интерес и да участват в медийни изяви по тяхно желание.
Участието на деца в репортажи не трябва да създава опасност от увреждане на тяхното физическо, психическо, нравствено или социално развитие. Отговорност за това имат родителите, настойниците или други лица, които полагат грижи за детето.
Дали разкриването на самоличността на детето няма да му навреди? Сигурни ли сме, че снимките или историята ни няма да създадат усещане за срам или неудобство? Възможно ли е това неудобство да се появи след години, когато детето е вече възрастно?
Даваме ли достатъчно гласност не само на проблемите на децата, но и на техните мнения и идеи като пълноправни членове на обществото? Осигуряваме ли достатъчна видимост на постиженията им? Можем ли да провокираме положителна промяна на обществените нагласи или търсим сензация?
Когато е наложително да се запази анонимността на детето, сигурни ли сме, че сме взели всички мерки, за да не може то да бъде идентифицирано? Проверихме ли задълбочено фактите, преди да говорим за деца, извършили насилие? Убедени ли сме, че знаем точно какво се е случило?
Бизнесът се взаимодейства ежедневно с децата. Неговото влияние се усеща както върху начина, по който пуска продукти и услуги на пазара, така и върху служителите, които са родители на нашите деца. Бизнесът може да направи много повече.
Деца, отглеждани в обществени институции или алтернативна грижа. Деца с увреждания. Децата от малцинствен или чужд произход. Децата, преживели или станали свидетели на насилие. Децата в конфликт с закона. Всички те са деца и винаги трябва да виждаме детето преди всичко.
На базата на пътеводителя, който...
Based on the guidebook that, well, I'm very happy to see already in your hands. So based on this, trainings will be developed for journalists, photojournalists, photo reporters, PR specialists, and others. These trainings will start as early as this May. So all of you who are interested can just call our team, UNICEF, or the Association of European Journalists, so that you can become part of these trainings. And I'm sure this will be useful and interesting for each and every one of us. A few very important things before we start our discussion. It will be about the written and unwritten rules in reporting on children and how children are presented in the media. Here with me, I have people who have to make decisions on a daily basis. Sometimes these are decisions that have to be taken in the blink of an eye. And I'd also like to say that for the first time, I have the unique opportunity of moderating a conference where the audience is made of journalists, or at least most of the audience, and our guests. So I really hope to have a very lively and interactive discussion. I know that there will be many questions in the course of this discussion, so indeed, make sure that you ask all your questions. We have enough mics. We have enough time. We're really looking at a very lively discussion. The preconditions are here. And the topics are very, very important. We'll look at the good examples and at the challenges. Let's not call them problems. Let me thank Maria Stoyanova, member of the Council for Electronic Media. You are well known, and ladies only. It has to do with the feminization of this profession. Probably women are more sensitive when it comes to reporting on children. Maria Milkova, Nova TV, Zina Trifonova, member of the board of the Bulgarian National Television, Polina Botev, producer BTV The News, and Tatiana Velichkova. We've been waiting for you to the very last minute. We very much wanted to have you among us, a producer at the Horizon program, Bulgarian National Radio. Anna Peklivanova, editor for Dnevnik. Elena Matev, a member of the board of the Bulgarian PR Association. And Alexandra Krusteva from BTV team. I'm very happy that we have real practitioners here because we have many topics and many questions to look at, especially when it comes to working in the field. When we were discussing how to organize today's meeting and also trying to put as many good examples as possible in the guidebook, we decided to open up this discussion with very short, but we also think very targeted examples from your own experience. So could you please tell us about those cases which you have reported and believe that you can be proud of, you and your media, just to start this whole meeting, this whole discussion on a very positive note? So whom do we start with? Anna? Good morning. I hope you can hear me well. I'm very happy, and I'd like to thank the organizers for this initiative. Indeed, it is very important for those who generate content, those who monitor content, such as me, those who are the policymakers. It's important for them to come together and have this extremely important conversation about children in the media, because at times of crisis, it always comes out that we have missed this type of discussion and this dialogue. So I'm very happy to see all of you here in this warm, sunny day. I'm very happy to see so many familiar faces, and indeed it is high time for this very serious conversation to happen. Conversation about the media, about children, about audiences, about our responsibility both as content generators and audience. However, before moving on to the positive example, I would like to share with you a topic which surfaced yesterday, the Reporters Without Borders report, which places Bulgaria at the very bottom of its list in the European Union and Europe as a whole. I'd say that this is not a fair rating. And I think it's very depressive, because we know that there are difficulties, but we're trying to cope with them. We're trying to fight. Last year, I invited a team of the ARD channel, the German television, and I talked to them, trying to convince them how unfair this rating is for Bulgarian journalism, Bulgarian media environment, as compared to countries such as Kuwait, because Bulgaria and Kuwait were sharing the same position. They came here. They saw a very different picture, very different face of Bulgarian journalism. Of course, I can find many more arguments, because I think that one of the countries, Hungary, I mean, which has been also unfairly rated, there are many arguments and explanations also in their case. But I know that we all know. We all know what the difficulties and the problems we have are as journalists, as media, as an industry. So let me stop here. But once again, this is a very depressing, a very bleak picture, a very grim one. And I think it is highly unfair. Against this grim backdrop, however, there are also positive developments. One of them, as chairwoman of the Council for Electronic Media up until a year ago, I had the pleasure of seeing truly competitive media, I mean, competing media rivals saying around the same table and discussing and reaching an agreement on the regulator's decision to put different markers with different colors on the screen for viewers of different ages for content which might be harmful. For our guest's sake, and I'd like to thank our guests for being here. We're very honored to have you here and to draw on your experience. So probably for you this is far from remarkable, because it has happened in your countries long ago, but to us it was a very important step, and it was a self-regulatory measure. It means that the media came together regardless of any competition between them. They came together to draft the single set of rules, the same requirements, so that they can provide the best content and at the same time prevent part of the audience from being harmed. This was something very important, and with it, Bulgaria is no longer one of the two countries in the European Union without such a rule, without such a regulation, and it made us part of the majority of countries who really keep track of the kind of content allowed on screen for the different age groups. So Czech Republic is finally the single country where there are no such regulations presently. It doesn't happen in Czech Republic because the industry there could not come together and reach an agreement on these criteria in order to warn the audience. So it happened in Bulgaria. I'm very glad and proud of it, and I'm here if you have any questions. I'm an optimist because I believe in unity, and children have this gift of making everyone unite. And besides here, we have content generators, content managers, and I believe that at the end of today's discussion, we will really shake our hands, shake each other's hands, because we are on the same side of the barrier. We're on the same boat, sorry. So, very good examples, probably also having to do with some challenges in the different media. Probably we can start with Polina Boteva. First of all, I'd like to I'm not sure that the lady's mic is properly working. I wanted to say, first of all, how happy I am with this conversation, because all of us who are here know how important it is to stick to the ethical rules, to the regulations in general on reporting children in the media, because they're our future and we have to protect them. We have to be proud that BTV journalist is part of the team behind this guidebook. It is a beautiful initiative. I read the entire guidebook last night. It's a very interesting read. And I can say that our media is trying to apply these rules of ethics, and they are very important. They're key rules, but we have to keep reminding each other of them, because sometimes you need to very, very quickly take a decision and make things happen. And of course, we need to not forget these rules in order to protect the child's identity, its rights and interests, as well as those of the child's family and friends. One example we can see as a very positive achievement, a campaign which is also quoted in the guidebook. It is called Together in the Kindergarten. It is important for children with special needs to be integrated, to be made part of our society, of the community, from as early age as possible, and in a very and try to report this in as mild terms as possible, so as not to make them feel uncomfortable. Also, with the materials that we show in our news or other shows, apart from compliance with the rules and ethical coverage, we also need to be able to further build up. I don't know if you remember the case of Bayram. It was not just a piece of news. It was not just a piece of reporting. It was a mission with a very happy end, and we really hope everything with this boy will be fine. We really hope to make ourselves useful in other situations such as this. It is very important in our practical work to adhere to these standards, to ask for the parents' consent if we have to record children with their proper faces and identity. Parents have to sign a declaration of consent, and the children should know that it is okay to speak to us, and that his or her parents are okay with this. If we have to hide an identity, I think we are doing it in the best possible way without revealing either personal data nor the child's face or name. There are different approaches to doing this, different ways. Some of them were already mentioned earlier. These are very good tips, very good advice, and I'm very happy that I found them in the guidebook. I really believe that this guidebook will be very useful for each and every young or better established journalists. We just need to be reminded from time to time. Now, Alexandra, you are a journalist. We worked together on the same team doing the guidebook. Very well done indeed. What's the type of support that a journalist needs, especially on the news? If you don't have all the time in the world, you don't have hours to get prepared, sometimes you need to be very fast and you have to make the right decisions quickly.
I would first like to say that I love telling the stories of children who have achieved something. I love asking children what they dream about, because they provide extraordinary answers. But frequently in my practice, I have had to tell the stories of children who have experienced violence, have witnessed violence, have problems or face problems that need to be addressed. And under the programs organized jointly with UNICEF, we address such cases. Then we had more time to address every story in the way I would like to, the way producers would like to. I was not pressed to make fast decisions. But still, regardless of the time you have, it is very difficult to tell the story of a child in all details. Yes, we are journalists. We speak about important issues, but these issues are not important only for us. They are important for everyone, because media is everywhere around us. We tell these stories to the people because we not only inform them, but we also create their opinions. And that's why we need to be very responsible towards our audience, especially when we talk about children. The examples I have are not really that positive. I mean, they won't make you smile, but I'm sure that everyone can tell a story in a beautiful way, even a sad story, and can leave in the audience the right attitude, because when you watch the story of a boy or a girl that has been raped, most of us would not like to even view it, hear it. But no, we should not change the TV channel, because these are things that unfortunately happen around us on everyday basis. So we need to go out of our comfort zone. And I have always tried to tell the stories in a way that would not make people just sad, but rather make them think, make them react, make them respond. Because if you're a neighbor to a person who's beating up his or her child, you should not turn a blind ear to this, but report. That's one of the points, to tell the unhappy stories of unhappy children. But from the positive side, if we can change the attitude of people towards, let's say, a child is usually a sunny creature with numerous talents, even if we are able to teach the society this is good. I would like to ask you, are there other people in your team with whom you communicate, with whom you discuss questions as how do I approach this or that issue? Back to some issues that we addressed with our guests earlier. Do you have psychologists that you can approach? Do you have enough time to react? Well, I have not worked with a psychologist so far, although there are things that are really difficult to overcome. But I consult friends, professionals, because it is good to hear other people's opinions. Sometimes you're walking on thin ice, and it is much better to hear various points of view. Another reporter, peers, so that you compare your direction. Naturally, you are the author, you have all the freedom. The first campaign, Future Without Violence, I have watched everything before it being aired to make sure that everything is really fine. But we need to be careful. So then, can we now move on to Maria from Nova Television? Can you tell us some of your stories? have there been cases where you create the material, but after that you reconsider it, you speak with people, they provide you with a different perspective, so you revisit this material? Of course, based on your experience. Yes, because we are all learning through doing. I try to have stories that are like sticking to a manual, especially when I tell the stories of children. Then I need to be extremely careful and pay attention to each and every detail. For people who know my work, some of it are aware that I love to tell inspiring stories. Even when I share difficult stories, lots of difficulties overcome by children, I always try to provide a different angle, which sometimes is, and I heard this earlier from our US colleague, that it is very important to answer the question, why? After you answer the question, what? So I think the difference between the prompt effect of a difficult story and after that making people think, making people live with it, but not with something terrible and sensational, but rather with something they will consider as a social problem or societal problem, then you move from the surface to in depth. You go in depth. And now some positive example. One of the latest projects was dedicated to a documentary, 15-16 minutes, and I entered place for institutional care for children or children raised without parental care. I had to sign at least 5 different types of forms and declarations. This happened in the town of Stara Zagora. And I, by the way, spoke with officials who were really respected people. So I entered this place because I wanted to show a positive example. And who brought me there? Over the last couple of years, from Stara Zagora, we've heard various pieces of news, something like the positive piece of news, how children found a wallet full of money, returned it, how a girl helped a driver, another boy who did something positive. And it suddenly appeared that all these children come from institutional care. And I said, well, in our society, we somehow believe, and that's what the principal, the headmistress said, that these children are not worth it. They are not good for the society. They are victims by birth, by default. We need to always think about their needs, but in purely material terms. So that's when I decided that I would like to give a different story and answer the question why these best practice examples come from the last, so to say, place that we would expect them to come from. However, there was a condition from the social assistance service in Stara Zagora not to raise any question regarding the history of these children. But you know, as journalists, that this is a huge challenge. I, in fact, wondered how would my story work if I don't say anything about the children, but it worked. And we explained how these children have been raised and how come that these children should not and must not be stigmatized. Okay, so how can a journalist not be tempted to create a material which should appear as top news, breaking news, rather than something which would be just mentioned in the last minute of the news rubric? How do you take, how do you make this decision not to create a sensation? Well, if you ask any journalist, I don't think any of them will tell you that they want to tell bad stories. No, I think that everyone tries to tell positive stories. But however, we cannot do this all the time. We have to raise questions, and usually there are more and more questions when there are problems, when there are issues, and we should try not to present this in a sensational way. So this is not really a temptation. You have to, you work on news because this is something that is important for the society. And I also think that the best practice example is the example that needs to be followed. When speaking about the written word, the written text, well, it's a different approach. A piece of news about children who do good acts, although coming from institutional background, or making the news a little bit more attractive for the audience. So now to the Dnevnik daily, I'm not very good with microphones. So I think that to a great extent we are in an easier position compared to our colleagues in the radio stations, the TV stations, because we use the language, the written language. We do not have to think of so many details, modulating voices, blurring images, wigs, and so on and so forth. However, with us, there are other specific requirements which are also a challenge. On the one hand, it is deadlines, because online media is the first to act. And when my colleagues say that sometimes they would love to have 2 or 3 more hours, we rarely have more than a few minutes. And something else, online media retains all the information which is on the internet. And this is important. News is sometimes forgotten. But when you write the name of someone in a search machine, a browser, information again pops up. And this may be very sensitive when we are talking about children. So with my colleagues, whenever there is a child-related topic, we discuss the issue. This is the best way to react. We do not have lots of time to respond. So we meet, we discuss the issue. Is it some type of tragedy that affects the children, or it is a tragedy that affects the child and the society, a big social issue? And whenever we see a big social issue, we think it is important to concentrate, to focus not on the story itself, but rather on the causes, on what was the reason and what should be done in order to prevent such cases. Some time ago, there was a case with a well-known athlete, a young girl who tried to kill herself. This was a very sensitive point in time, a very popular, publicly well-known figure in a sport which is also very popular in Bulgaria. This was the public interest was very big at that time because our team was participating in a big championship, and we started by looking for the reasons a young people would try to commit suicide. This was one approach, or just to go through all the details in her personal life that led her to such a decision. So it was a difficult moment to strike the balance. So we decided to approach psychologists and to rather look for the reasons which will make such a young people make such a tragic decision. It was a difficult case. There was loads of public discussion. There is no need to go into much detail, but that's what we decided at that time. I cannot say that I'm convinced that we always make the right decision, but just as Maria, I think that in most cases journalists are well-meaning. They do not want to cover bad stories by default, but sometimes anyone can make a mistake. So the more internal regulations media has, the more internal discussion and external there is, the more is left in our minds and the more we think about the consequences. Something else regarding what is the trace left after the piece of news is written down. Well, online media retains the information with the TV channels, with the radio stations. It goes. My colleagues sometimes say that on TV it is like writing on water. You see it and then it goes away. But currently all media is online. Whether we like it or not, whether we are aware of it or not, that's the reality. Television, online media, everybody keeps records and backup files. So images, words, stigma, anything can be found easily today. And when we are talking about children, this becomes even more important. And today, even with the new regulation, you need to ask to be forgotten. So can you say that apart from your professional standards, you also have ethical standards or code of conduct? What are they? You have the so-called kids dnevnik. This is like a supplement to the dnevnik daily. Well, we do not have them formally written down when we discuss issues. There is a main rule regarding the importance of the issue and can we address it without penetrating the privacy of the child, and if we have to do it, how far we can go, rather trying to have a minimum interference. You represent one of the most significant private media in Bulgaria. These people also worked on the development and creation of the guidebook. Maybe it was not a good idea to divide the private and public media when we're talking about children, but you are part of this whole battle for ratings. And the big question now is not only for difficult cases, but the presence of children in the media in general. What is your experience? Do you follow specific ethical standards, and how children find their place in the public media, public television? Before answering, I would like to change the point of view a little bit, because the question of covering children is extremely important. Is there any need for regulation? Yes, at the Bulgarian national television there are no written rules, but attention is paid to the content. And if children and how would children respond? So I think that the behavior of the media can be defined in terms of how children will accept, react to content, and on the other, how media would react. So I would like to ask you to go back to the movie we saw, Mrs. Rahman's documentary, and I wondered how would children react. I would like to ask BBC what time slot did they choose to air to broadcast the documentary. What was the result? Was there consequence? How children responded? How they reacted? I would also like to ask how media management react to such cases when social problems are identified, when solutions are needed, or mechanisms to overcome the causes that gave rise to such problems. So public television supports their journalists, provides them with freedom to address any type of issue. This booklet that I got today, I consider as a great foundation for writing individual documents with all media. But because you need to understand me in the right way, because I'm not a journalist by background, but a lawyer. So it is important to come to common decisions, solutions, how to approach children, how to handle stories, children-related stories. Somebody from Nova Television already said that we, the media, are responsible to the child, to his fate, to his future, and then to the audience, to the society. Same question to Tanya Velichkova, producer with Horizon radio channel. You also represent public media, and I will ask you the same question. Do you have any ethical standards, code of conduct? And I'm going to ask the audience the very same question. Things are very similar with the two public media, national radio, just as the national television. We do not have any specific formally written rules that set standards. And when I read this guidebook, which is very useful, I understood that we in fact have lots of standards. We have the Code of Conduct of Bulgarian media. We have the agreement regarding harmful content, and we from the national radio are signatory to this agreement. We have the BBC guidebook, numerous other rules and standards, but we do not have them as an operational habit. That's why I liked the fact that in Dnevnik Daily they would have these discussions, because when there is shortage of time, we have to sometimes rely on our professional intuition, on our human judgment regarding restrictions. So I welcome the idea of trainings for journalists, which can be addressed not only to young people, but also to more experienced reporters, because everyone needs to remember and be reminded, especially in times when we are pressed for time. I think this guidebook can be very useful manual for us at the National Radio. I would like to tell you a story from our experience, where all these problem areas were more or less seen. A young colleague, a young journalist, joined us to work for the National Radio, very interested in investigations, and some of us, the more experienced professionals, thought that we have already been there, that we do not, there is no sense to pay more attention. But this person received reliable information about very concerning methods of raising, so to say, children in family type of child care in a village. So the children, in fact, have told some rather worrying stories, and it looked like the outline of a story that needed to be told. So the children in this care are supervised by the managers of the center, and in order to record them, we had to ask for the permission of these managers. At the same time, in this center, there were also children with parents. And during the discussions, two of these children went back to their biological father, and we were allowed to, the father allowed us to participate in the report and be recorded. With the other children, however, it was not possible to get permission. So we decided to do the following. They were recorded without the consent of the managers of this center. Their voices were changed and their names were not mentioned. We decided that they have the right to be heard, because the children wanted to share this with they, and they were courageous enough to do it. After the first series of reports, this accommodation center or center of a family type, the management responded saying these children are imagining things. What they say is not true. How can you trust only children, or the story if it is told only by the children? And one of the people from this center, an elderly person, in fact, had the courage to tell what was happening. The specific case was that the principal or the manager of this center was very authoritarian, and she and all the other staff was kind of afraid of her. And this elderly person, however, told us the story. What happened after that? A claim was, charges were pressed against this person who recorded the children. The prosecutor decided that the case should be dropped, agreeing that the recordings were done in compliance with the law. The person who witnessed, who was a kind of witness, was fired from this center. And gradually, this case became a kind of cliche during all these checks that take time, that there are lots of institutions involved, and suddenly the topic became outdated or not interested. Well, some children said something, okay, there are methods there, maybe violent methods, but suddenly the institutions stood against the journalists, and these institutions, the authorities, made this story kind of banal, and the conclusions were rather contradictory or non-conclusive. Yes, there are some irregularities, but maybe not so grave that we should penalize the manager. Today, these children who told us their stories are not anymore in this center. There are other children, however, there. The staff person who told us the story was unemployed for a long time. But based on all this, I understood that we suddenly appeared alone in this case, on our own in this case. And when I listened to the presentations earlier, I kind of started dreaming about these strong legal teams, teams of psychologists who can support us and give us tips on what is the best thing to do. Because working with children or children-related issues is a teamwork. I'm convinced that working in order to change the mentality of people can be done only if you get broad support. Yes, very good. Broad support not only within our professional community, but outside of it. This guidebook that we are presenting today will is connected to trainings and hopefully it will raise a discussion. So who do you think should be involved in these discussions? Lawyers, experts in media, who else should we include in the discussion? Who else? By who else, I mean people who can support us, because we need to obviously stand against the authorities. Well, allow me to appeal to all of you and somehow protect you from a serious risk. Based on some of the statements made by the colleagues from the period. Do not make the mistake to cover children as a blank, blank space, because even when you have the permission of parents, because sometimes the society and journalists have to protect children sometimes from their own parents, because they are not always aware of consequences that might appear because of some footage of some recordings. Because even if you explain things, even it is considered as legitimate to record the child and interview the child because you had the parents' permission. But when we talk about media literacy, that's what I mean. reasonable understanding, because what we generate is a kind of product, a product that is given to the audience. This product may entertain, but also may damage, may hurt. So if we focus on media, the media literacy, media education of the whole society, of parents and children, then probably there would be less problems of the type that we are talking, because we look all the time towards our colleagues from BBC and from the US, but they also have had and have their own problems. The BBC rules, for example, and BBC has been under regulation since recently. It was the only media in Europe that was not really supervised. But even these big markets, these industries that dominate the world, have been through this, have encountered the same problems, and maybe that led us to understanding the media. Well, media literacy is important. Recently, a coalition was set up. I'm not going to mention all of their names. The truth is that here we are, people that generate content, produce content, but everybody now generates content. Sometimes they do it without even knowing how to do it and not knowing how to use it. This is a kind of vicious circle, and I think that the media with which our children grow, TV channels, radio, online media, they have their huge influence. That's why it is important for us to generate the best practice. So what is the opinion of the PR expert? Maybe Ali wanted to add things. Yes, I understood that we as communicators are in a favorable position, because, thank God, we do not have to cover tragedies or really very difficult problems of public interest. At the same time, as communicators and representative of the business, we have a different role, but it is also a very responsible role. On the one hand, as we saw in the movie, the business influences the children's life, not only because we do not use child labor, but also because business plays important role in the overall economic development, economic and social development of the country. So as communicators, we are very careful regarding the content we create, the way we show our products, and also the messages that we send to the society. The easiest way is to focus media attention by showing smiling kids. But I think that the business is already beyond the point in time when we give gifts during holidays, visit institutions for children, and insist that we are broadcast on media. No, we are beyond this already. Important projects are also projects regarding non-commercial communication. I mean, like internal company or in-company events like open company days, and also events when the children are in the very focus of the event. There was a great example of a conference dedicated to education and children, education and business, when we were allowed the sponsors to show how we support universities. And I myself represent Pharma, the pharmaceutical company. This was broadcast on Bulgaria Air TV channel. We invited a school team in chemistry because they had recently won the gold medal at the World Olympiad on chemistry. It was very interesting. There were these children, 12 years old, showed us that they're already in love with a very hard profession as profession related with chemistry. So this is a good way to provide children with a venue to show their capabilities. Otherwise, obviously it's very easy, much easier for us to have a representative of ours, show some slides, and underline what a good company we are. Another inspiring example: numerous companies, members of the Bulgarian network of the UN Global Compact, a project called I'm Proud with the Work of My Parents. This is a kind of open doors day. Employees can bring their children over to the workplace, including some very hard industries as pharmaceuticals, energy industry, banking sector, places where children rarely have the opportunity to go. So what did we do? We let the children in, and we all the time try to respect all the rules written down in our code of conduct, the PR code of conduct, as well as the ethical standards for advertising and commercial messages. We were very careful when we were filming children because, for example, in the power plant, we need to take all safety measures and guarantee that it would be accepted in the right way. So all these standards that media follows is something that we must follow as well. And we do it not because they're put on paper, because, well, we know code of conduct is a kind of self-regulation, but we stick to them because we know that this is the right way to change the overall attitude within the society. Another trend I've noticed, I don't know how you will react, keeping in mind that this is a media forum, but very rarely companies now send messages or press release about projects to the media newsroom. This is a change, maybe because of the boom in the online social media, the corporate media. All the time we are flooded by information, and more frequently people, or we would decide to use our own channels for communication. And I mean public interest, important projects. So only then they're welcome to react. back to the great example of the project, I'm proud with the work my parents. It finished a year ago with a film, and the children were able to tell what they have seen, what they have learned. The idea of the project was to create in children understanding, perception that parents are not the people who are always dissatisfied with them, but are people who create some valuable product for their company. And this was also a way to make children understand that their parents are not ATMs, that they are paid because they have knowledge and skills, because they have given something, and as a result they receive something. This is something that we can do, and everyone can do if everyone does their tasks in the right way. This was a very inspiring experience for all the children. I think it is very important for children to learn what they, or give them a venue to tell us what they know, what they want. We opened a completely new door in our discussion regarding children participation. When I received the invitation to participate in this, in the development of this guidebook, I said that as a journalist, I have never been assigned or have never had to cover difficult stories with children. Just the opposite. I work with school children who create amazing things, portals, develop portals, write poetry, kind of the happy side of children's participation. And then we started thinking, are children included sufficiently when it is not a tragedy that had affected them? Okay, the answer was negative, I heard. But let's wish that we change things. Well, this is an important thing because children are surrounded by everything happening. However, in an unfriendly language, if there is a tragedy, for example, there was a big accident on a motorway, this is something that they hear from parents, from anyone, but the language is something that they do not understand. So my big appeal is connected with the usage of child-friendly language regarding news and reports. Because it also matters. What also matters is the way that children get information about things that make their parents unhappy, nervous, concerned. And this is something that we should all work on, the language we use. And back to the guidebook. When I went through it for the last time last night, and I enjoyed it. Yes, it addresses journalists and experienced professionals, but also the addressee should be the children, the young people, because they're the creators and users of content on the internet, vloggers, bloggers, the voices of young people who do what who are our part of our main message. I thought that it would be much more interactive. I see that you're listening with interest, but I introduced myself in the beginning. I'm a lawyer. I would like to ask you, each and every of you, regardless of your professional area, you are experienced, it is obvious, but did you feel you were well prepared to work with children when you graduated and started working for the specific media? And do you think that the young people, the young journalists and professionals are already prepared to work with children? Or it is all done on the learning by doing, making errors and learning from it? I'm teaching constitutional law at Sofia University. There are many graduates in law, but they are not prepared at all in the area of media law. Very few universities are involved in this. And on the other hand, we have the journalists who receive some media legal background in universities. But what is your experience? What are your perceptions?
Аз с едно изречение ще отговоря. Не съм получила този опит в университета и понеже тук има студенти по журналистика, те също могат да кажат по какъв начин това е застъпено в образованието в момента. За съжаление нямаме право с деца да работим на принципа проба-грешка, защото често пъти грешките са драматични и често пъти ние не разбираме за тях, защото ефекта, за който говорим, дългосрочния върху психиката на детето, след като ние вече сме причинили нещо, ние дори може и да не разберем. Моя опит с деца мисля, че стана по-осъзнат, когато аз самата станах майка. И мисля, че ние всички като произвеждащи съдържание трябва да си даваме сметка, че тази детска аудитория, която имаме в момента, е една много специална аудитория и тези деца не растат по нашите правила, а ние трябва да изучаваме техните правила. И затова много благодаря, че влезе темата с влогарите, защото мисля, че децата много повече се влияят от това съдържание в социалните мрежи, от това, което влогарите им показват като модел, отколкото от традиционните медии. И това е една неизследвана територия за мен.
Имаме още въпроси, да?
Аз искам да отговоря на този въпрос последния начин. Изключително привилегирована е ситуацията, в която се намирам аз. Моето първо висше образование, аз съм магистър по начална училищна педагогика в Софийския университет, така че имах подготовка. Но аз като журналист завърших журналистика, аз съм Master of Advanced Studies от Европейската журналистическа академия в Австрия. И след това попаднах в една среда в немскоязичния свят, в която ако спешно не се бях запознала с абсолютно всички правила, свързани с снимането на деца по улицата, с това, че аз нямам право като журналист, независимо, че отразявам една история, която няма връзка с деца, да снимам децата, техните лица, аз нямаше как да работя. Тоест, средата ме принуди спешно да науча всички правила и всички разпоредби, свързани с начина ми на работа. Това е нещо, което ми липсва понякога в България и смятам, че това пък, че ние дори и по улиците сме свикнали да не спазваме правилата, шофирайки, не ни поставя в атмосфера, не ни поставя в среда, в която и като журналисти да се чувстваме длъжни да четем всички онези неща, които иначе имаме на хартия.
Да. И аз бих искала да кажа нещо по тази тема. Всъщност подкрепям напълно думите на Мария. На мен и всъщност на всички колеги, убедена съм, всички тези неща са ги учили в движение. Личният ми опит е, че много съм се притеснявала да не сбъркам някъде, но общо взето завършила съм журналистика в УНСС. Няма да се спирам много на образованието по журналистика в България, не ми се ще. Там не са ни подготвили по този начин, а всъщност в практиката ти трябва да си много добре подготвен в детайли. И всъщност ние всички го правим сами, което е малко притеснително, защото смятам, че не всички колеги са достатъчно отговорни да го направят. И смятам, че трябва да има, това трябва да е застъпено в образованието.
Да. Заповядайте.
Здравейте, Емилия Славова се казвам. Чува ли се?
Да.
Не съм журналист, преподавател съм в университета. искам да се изкажа да подкрепя това, което каза Мария Стоянова за родителите и това, че родителят да дава съгласие, не трябва да се приема непременно да се използва пълно и че не винаги родителите знаят какво е добре за децата. Лично свидетел съм наистина на тази липса на медийна грамотност от много родители, включително моя приятелка, която е също така жертва на сексуално насилие, много тежко си беше пуснала снимка на дъщерята гола на балкона, която се полива с вода и аз не можах да убедя защо не е окей това нещо. Тази сутрин водих един дебат с жени в "Не си сама срещу насилието", в която те току-що бяха осъзнали, че групата е отворена и всъщност всички виждат какво пишат. И в този момент една жена реши да изплёска новината как нейният съпруг е извършвал някакви ужасни неща върху гениталиите на дъщеря. И аз си казах, този пост може би не е за тук, не би трябвало да се пише. Тя каза, защо нека всички да знаят? Казва, може да видят съученици, учители. Нали, не е редно, тя дори не може да чете. Нали, пълно неглижиране на правата, на нуждите на децата и общо взето никой не се включи в подкрепа на това, че трябва да се прикрива тази информация. Абсолютно публична. Нали, не си сама срещу насилието, се казва групата. В този смисъл искам да кажа, че тази нужда от медийна грамотност, тя няма откъде да се създаде. Наистина медиите сте тези, които трябва да я създадете. И бих посъветвала съвсем конкретно, когато следващия път правите коментари, спазвате тези правила, които сега сте разписали, които вярвам, че са прекрасни, да правите метакоментар. Защо показвате нещо по някакъв начин? Защо прикривате идентичността на детето, самоличността на детето? Просто вие да ограмотявате публиката за необходимостта да се крие самоличността. И по някакъв начин, така както видяхме във филма на BBC с анимацията и с обяснението, че те са използвали методи от арт-терапия, нямаше да ми направи впечатление, ако тя не го беше казала. Просто за мен беше много ценен този коментар и ми се иска да го виждам и да чувам това нещо и в репортажите ви. Не само спазване на етиките, но и метакоментар защо и какво правите, за да ограмотите останалите.
Ами ето това е...
Знаете ли, аз имах възможност вече да кажа, че това, с което се сблъскваме ние в България, с проблемите на растежа, на израстване и на развитие в една медийна индустрия, в една медийна демокрация, са проблеми, през които са минали и други държави. Сега се сещам, защото се навършват 10 години от този случай. Това е най-зловещото нещо в моята практика. Като журналист, вие знаете, че аз се занимавам с външна политика. А като кореспондент в Германия пък се занимаваш с абсолютно всичко, което се случва в държавите, в които работиш, в случая Германия, Австрия, Швейцария, Полша и Унгария. В Австрия преди 10 години се случи нещо брутално, което вцепени целия свят. Един баща, нарича се Йозеф Рицел, този човек, 10 години се навършват сега от този случай. В продължение на дълги години беше държал дъщеря си в мазе в къщата им и я беше изнасилвал и от тази инцест връзка имаше 7 деца. Тогава всички медии от немскоязичния свят, естествено, а и не само немскоязичния, от целия нормален мислещ свят, се бяха устремили към селцето малкото в Долна Австрия, където се беше случил този брутален случай. Той се нарича Амштетен, може би някои от вас си го спомнят. Апропо на това селце, на това малко градче, почетен гражданин е Адолф Хитлер. Бил. Но това няма общо. Тогава имаше огромен глад от страна на всички медии да покажат децата. Защото какво е по-интересно в тази случка, освен като видим злодея, да видим жертвата и да видим и другите жертви. Имаше медии от големи държави, които бяха платили. Така че да могат да се доберат до най-подходящото място за снимка на децата и на дъщерята. Обаче не се стигна до там. Имаше снимки, които в крайна сметка обаче не бяха публикувани. И тук вече говорим за един свръхусет за морал, за нещо, което е правилно и неправилно. Ясно е, че снимките на децата, още веднъж, те бяха направени. Услужливи съседи бяха предоставили възможност на своите балкони, на камера екипите да направят съответните снимки. И такива снимки имаше. За тези снимки се знае. Но техните личица не бяха видяни. Никой до ден днешен не знае как изглеждат тези хора. Защото в крайна сметка стана ясно, че се е случило това плащане. Възмущението в самата гилдия, на всички нас, които присъствахме там в тази ситуация, беше до такава степен огромно, че не се стигна до публикуването им. И знаете ли, Не случайно ви давам този пример, защото в такива ситуации не толкова зловещи, слава Богу, Господ ни пази в тази държава, да не се сблъскваме с такива случаи, но понякога е трудно да запазиш хуманизма си, чувството си за морал. Е хубаво да има около тебе някой, който да те хване и да търси, да каже стоп, не, стига толкова. И това е, може би, нещо, което много често ни е необходимо в критични ситуации.
Аз затова смятам, намесвам се да кажа, че тази среща, тя няма как да бъде задълбочена, защото има толкова много неща, които могат да се кажат за присъствието на децата в медиите. И от едната и от другата страна на медала, но е много важно присъствието на всички вас тук, защото тогава, когато става дума за нарушаване на някаква законова рамка, СЕМ може да се самосезира или да бъде сезиран като орган, но когато говорим за етични норми, то говорим само за нашата собствена автоцензура, авторегулация и за това докъде може и откъде натам не може. И много ми хареса това, че вие дадохте даже идея, не знам дали се усети, да говорим не само за обединението на медиите, които вие представлявате, което пък е нашата голяма надежда, да си тръгнем от тук с идеята, че си подаваме ръка и че от тук натам ще се работи заедно в тази посока, както за червената точка. Ето, вие подсказахте, че може не просто да се вдигат стандартите, не е малко, задължително е, но и да се комуникира защо се случва и по този начин да се възпитава аудитория. Съм сигурна, особено обществените медии, въпреки че нека да не се делим. Да, има още един въпрос, той ще е последен, защото разбирам, че времето вече е оскъдно. Да, заповядайте.
Здравейте, първо искам да ви благодаря за дискусията. Ще ме извините, защото български не ми е първи език. Въпросът ми сега най-вече спрямо имплементацията, защото разбира се, това, което сте създали заедно е нещо уникално и много добре написано, това, което прегледах. Спрямо имплементацията, тук разбира се има журналисти от BTV, от Нова, от БНТ, ама ако говорим за другите медии, какви ще бъдат следващите стъпки, да кажем следващата година? Имате ли някакви цели на как ще се разпространява този пътоводител и не само в сферата на журналисти, но също извън това?
Каним веднага колега от Асоциация на европейските журналисти. Да, аз го погледнах и веднага му доставиха микрофон. Това е телепатия.
Да, благодаря за въпроса. Всъщност, с тази среща това е едно начало. Бихме искали да продължат тези усилия. Много се радваме, че тук имаме всички вас, представители на трите национални телевизии, Националното радио, представител на СЕМ, на Дневник, разбира се, и на специалистите по връзки с обществеността. И започваме обучения за журналисти и за професионалисти, включително и за пиари. Започваме съвсем скоро, още от следващия месец, така че се надяваме това да не остане само на хартия, тъй като още първоначалният замисъл беше не да се създадат поредния документ, да се създаде поредния документ, да се създаде една жива общност най-вече. И процесът беше мислен така да се създава заедно, това да го правим заедно като колективно усилие и да разширяваме тази група. Започнахме от група от 15 на души в работната група. Ето сега днес имаме вече над 100 души, които се надявам да сме общност и да работим заедно. Ивайло от UNICEF, Ивайло Спасов от UNICEF ще допълни за...
Мерси. С повечето от вас се познаваме, така че... Иван плюс това ме представи, така че няма да се представям. В допълнение на това, което той каза, само искам да допълня, че голямата ни мечта, ако мога така да кажа, голямата ни амбиция от тук нататък, за да отговоря директно на въпроса на Мартин, е в две посоки. Първо, освен с професионалната гилдия, с която очевидно работим и която възприемаме като уникален партньор, всяка една от медиите, всяка една от професионалните общности, искаме да започнем да работим изключително ползотворно с студентите и с университетите, защото, както каза и Мария, както споменаха и други колеги, там може би е разковничето за голямата промяна. Да започнем да въвеждаме етичните стандарти и принципите още докато озрява съзнанието на младите поколения журналисти и професионалисти за това какво е редно, какво не е, къде е тънката граница. И другото, моя лична, как да кажа, мечта и професионална, разбира се, е всички тези хора, които сега присъстват тук и с които си партнираме и на които сме безкрайно благодарни, да се превърнат в посланици на това добро начинание. Защото UNICEF, АЕЖ имат потенциален капацитет, но и ограничени възможности да достигнат до широката професионална общност. Но ако всеки един от вас в своята си медия, сред своите си колеги, приятели и така нататък, бъде какъвто всъщност вече е ролеви модел всеки един от вас и продължава да отстоява добрите практики на дела, аз мисля, че това ще бъде най-устойчивото нещо, което може да се случи от тук нататък. Просто чрез ролевите модели на хората, които са олицетворения на добрите практики.
Може ли секунда? Според мен е хубаво да започнете с тези обучения още по-рано, не с студенти, а с ученици. Да. Защото ние някак говорим за децата като за една пасивна група. Как ние се отнасяме към тях, как ние правим нещо към тях, докато те имат достатъчно активност, достатъчно поглед и много ясно мнение по много от въпросите. И създаването на медийна грамотност е онова, което създава от тях критериите за това, кои медии следят, как формират мнението си, кои медии категорично не следят. Защото разговора върви в плоскостта какво ние всички се опитваме да направим и някак мълчим за това, че има и други медии, които не спазват тези правила и най-вероятно няма и да ги спазват. Аз в този смисъл не споделям оптимизма на госпожа Стоянова за това, че класациите, в които ни слагат, не са съвсем справедливи. Да, в някаква степен може би не са справедливи, но има и много, много неща, за които ние си знаем и които са проблематични и някак не е окей да се правим, че ги няма. Ми се струва, че просто трябва да започнете по-отрано, за да можете да създавате един начин на мислене у младежите.
Мисля, че се обединихме около тази идея. Наистина сме на финалната отсечка, така че много благодаря на всеки един от участниците. Бих разговаряла час и нещо с всеки един от вас и всички бихме ви слушали час и нещо всеки един от вас. Просто наистина времето ни беше лимитирано. На мен не ми достигна много да чуя от всеки един от участниците ни днес, но наистина смятам, че днешното ви присъствие тук беше, нека да го наречем знаково и въпреки, че сме така по линия, аз ви виждам по-скоро като част от една кръгла маса. Така че сърдечно благодаря от името на АЕЖ и от името на UNICEF. И още няколко благодарности накрая, тъй като така и не казахме кои са хората, които участваха. Участвахме в разработването на този документ, нека така да го наречем, пътеводител наръчник. Александра Кръстева, Весела Банова, Георги Апостолов, Даниел Киряков, Ирина Недева, Мария Милкова, Мария Чернева, Николай Дойчинов, Олег Попов, Огнян Пенев, Росен Босев, Симона Велева и Цвета Бресничка. Така че това са хората, които се обединихме. Много ви благодаря. Ще можем да изпием по чаша кафе или друго. Така че разговорът ще продължи вече в неформална среда. Много благодаря.
Две неща. Заповядайте да си направим една снимка пред сцената.
Съжалявам, да, това беше
и
много
да
важно.
напомня, че на гърба на информацията на програмата има форма за обратна връзка. Ако желаете, може да попълните и да ги оставите на рецепцията. Благодарим на всички.